Make sure that we are live across the board. If you're not a regular of the program, then you may not know this, but we do multi-stream across a number of different platforms. We need to make sure they're alive and well before we get started, and it looks like we are, so let's get rolling. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful, sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. We help them navigate through the criminal justice system. And over our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our criminal justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a thing called justice, and it all starts at the top with the politicians, the people who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and I to follow, but sometimes they have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And so that's why we started this program called Watching the Watchers, so that together we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon the very system, which is why we're so grateful that you're here joining us in our endeavor. Our hope is to encourage some meaningful change throughout our society, and we can't do that without your loving support. And so we've got a lot to get into today. Let's give you a little bit of an outline, a rough overview. The breaking news of the day, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, is Senator Josh Hawley out of Missouri is indicating now that he's going to be objecting to the electoral vote count when that happens on January 6th, coming up next week. So that is big news. We've been following this for some time, ever since the election, been trying to identify what senator, if any, would join a House representative in objecting to those electoral votes. And so he came out and gave a very forceful statement, says next week, I'm going to be doing just that. So we want to break down Josh Hawley's statement. We want to talk about what that might mean. We're going to spend a decent amount of time today talking about the U.S. Code and the different rules that are necessary in order to successfully lodge an objection, how all that works. It's actually very complicated, and for good reason. There's a lot of attorneys, a lot of constitutional lawyers all around the country sort of scratching their head about how to interpret this thing, because the statute was written back in the 1800s, leaves a lot of room for interpretation. It's open to sort of a procedural analysis or interpretation by Congress itself. And so we're going to see if we can tease out a little bit of guidance on how this is all going to go. We're also going to talk a little bit about Trump's new Supreme Court lawsuit. You may have missed that in all of the news of the day, but Trump and his legal team filed a new lawsuit in front of the Supreme Court. They filed a petition for a writ of certiorari there, and they're suing Joe Biden. A lot of the new lawsuit is centered around what's been going on in Wisconsin. So we have, of course, the complaint or the petition. So we're going to break that down, analyze a little bit of that as well. We've also got a new order that came out of Georgia. There was a federal district court in Georgia, and the judge out of there, her name is Leslie Abrams Gardner, and her last name, or her middle name, is her hyphenated, I think, maiden name is Abrams, which you may recall from Stacey Abrams, who is a big, high-profile politician in the state of Georgia, who's also largely involved with some grassroots voter registration organization, things like that. And so many people are sort of scratching their heads. Well, wait a minute. If her sister is a federal judge, and she issued a ruling that is going to impact these upcoming special elections, isn't that a conflict of interest? Isn't this something where she should recuse herself? We're going to break that down. We have a copy of her order. We're going to show you what the original complaint was, why there was a lawsuit in the first place, because they were trying to sort of clean up some of the voter rolls that were in Georgia, and Judge Abrams came out and sort of put the kibosh on that. Then I want to point you towards one of the best, I think, investigative journalists in 2020, just a few days left, and this guy nailed it. His name is Dave Biscoe, over at ABC 15, our local affiliate, did an amazing job putting out an investigatory report on Brady lists, which is officer integrity lists here in Arizona. I want to point you to that. If you are going to watch anything, watch that, because this guy has an epic takedown of a lot of the misconduct that you see around the state of Arizona. So we got a lot to get to today, a lot. I mean, I had a full show anyways, and then this afternoon learned that Josh Hawley was going to be objecting to the electoral counting of the votes. So we've got even more to talk about, but that's all right. We're going to get through it. Before we dive in, want to invite you to come and join us by hitting the subscribe button if you've not already done so. We do go live at this time every day of the week. We want you to be a part of that conversation. So a thumbs up, a share, invite somebody to come be a part of this conversation alongside you. We'd be very appreciative of that. We also, as the format here goes, I am going to be going through some slides. Those slides are available to you if you would like them. At the end of the program, you can go over to our Discord chat server, and the slides will be posted there as soon as we finish the broadcast. There's also a free copy of my book called Beginning to Winning that you can grab in the Discord server. And as we're going through the presentation, feel free to send your questions in on Discord or on the live chat. You can just send a message there. Any super chats that come through, Miss Faith is going to be clipping those, and I will address those at the end of the presentation. So let's get into it. We're going to start with the big news of the day. Of course, Josh Hawley posted on Twitter. He said, millions of voters are concerned about election integrity. They deserve to be heard. I will object on January 6th on their behalf. And so he posted this statement. And the news has been going bananas. We're going to go through some of it, but let's break down what he is saying here first. Hawley on the statement on objecting during Electoral College certification process on January 6th. So that is next week. That is going to be on Wednesday next week. 1 week from today is D-Day in Congress. And Josh Hawley, his statement here says, quote, following both the 2004 and 2016 elections, Democrats in Congress objected during the certification of electoral votes in order to raise concerns about election integrity. They were praised by Democratic leadership and the media when they did, and they were entitled to do so. But now, those of us concerned about the integrity of this election are entitled to do the same. I cannot vote to certify the Electoral College results on January 6th without raising the fact that some states, particularly Pennsylvania, failed to follow their own state election laws. And I cannot vote to certify without pointing out the unprecedented effort of mega corporations, including Facebook and Twitter, to interfere in this election in support of Joe Biden. At the very least, Congress should investigate allegations of voter fraud and adopt measures to secure the integrity of our elections. But Congress has so far failed to act. For these reasons, I will follow the same practice Democrat members of Congress have in years past and object during the certification process on January 6th to raise these critical issues, which was, whoa, we were a little bit critical of Josh Hawley last week when he signed that disgusting $2.4 trillion stimulus bill without even reading it. And he came back out and was sort of backpedaling pretty quickly on that. And so now he comes out and sort of reverses course. He seemed to have been losing some of the Trump supporters. People were very upset with him. But now he kind of was reversing course a little bit, right? A lot of people are kind of scratching their heads and saying, where did this guy come from? This is very interesting. And the media on Twitter, a lot of the blue check marks, they were pretty unhappy about some of this. So let's take a look at some of the response. The keyword of the day, the vocab word is seditious. Oh, seditious. Is Josh Hawley being seditious? Well, a lot of people on Twitter seem to think so. We got Michelangelo's Signorelli, whatever that name is, says, I hope Josh Hawley has effectively ended his career today with this seditious action. Let's make it happen. I don't think so. I think this is actually going to be a good launching for his political career. We have Titus who says, hey, Joe Biden, just start calling it treason. It's treason, plain and simple. Another blue check mark, this guy's name is Titus, says they are protecting Russia and the hack. It's seditious, and you need to call the traitors out. Another blue check mark, Amy Siskin. For anyone worried about January 6th, don't be. It's just a stunt, a disgraceful, seditious stunt. And sedition was trending this afternoon on Twitter. Scott Dworkin says, thanks, Senator Hawley, for helping Dems in Georgia get out the vote. Your seditious act really helps a lot. And Jennifer Rubin, who most people know who she is, Hawley has become part of the seditious MAGA crowd. So, a lot of people are saying, well, what Josh Hawley is attempting to do is sedition. It's treason. He's trying to overturn our democracy, even though it's not really a democracy, right? It's a republic. And what Josh Hawley is doing is just executing the rules, right? He's just following what the rules are. We're going to break those down here shortly. He has every right to object. Every single senator does. As he mentioned in his own statement, the Democrats have done this previously in the past. We've played a video of it on this channel where Maxine Waters was on the floor of Congress waving around her written statement objecting to President Donald Trump getting elected on the House floor during a joint session. I mean, she's asking them, this was 4 years ago on January 6, 2017. Maxine Waters, a Democrat from California, was up there, kind of shaking her hand around. I need a senator to join me. Nobody was willing to do that. And so her objection didn't really go anywhere. But the point is, there's precedent for this, right? There's literally statutes. We're going to talk about them today. And what Josh Hawley is doing is attempting to utilize those statutes. So that by itself doesn't make it sedition, doesn't make it treason. He's allowed to object to it. You can have your opinions on that, whether that's a good political move or not, whether this is a legitimate type of an objection, or if this is purely out of political spite. You can categorize it however you want, but it's not sedition. It's not treason. It's not a coup. It's in the law. He's allowed to do it. And he's actually following the letter of the law, right? They're not changing the rules at the last minute like we saw a lot of other courts and a lot of other states try to do pre-election. They were manipulating rules all over the place. Josh Hawley's not manipulating anything. He's just following the rules as they are written. You can disagree about the underlying rationale for his deciding to do so, but the fact is, it's just not sedition. That is hyperbole, and a lot of the people on Twitter were really going through that today. I mean, it was sort of a little bit of a conniption fit around the interwebs. Now, Walmart even got in on the outrage. Walmart today, somebody from their social media team, in response to Josh Hawley's Twitter, Walmart was also trending over Twitter today. They said, "Go ahead, get your 2-hour debate, sore loser." So they were responding to Josh Hawley. This is from the official Walmart account. So Josh Hawley, really sort of capitalized on that and says, "Well, maybe you'd like to apologize for your pathetic wages you pay your workers as you drive mom and pop stores out of business." So, just doing a little bit of a slam dunk on him. But boycott Walmart was trending 33,000 tweets the last time I checked. So, people were very outraged about that as well. Walmart came out. There's a little bit of a tangent here, but kind of funny. Walmart said that, well, their tweet was mistakenly posted by a member of our social media team who intended to publish this comment to their personal account. Don't you hate when that happens? They issued an apology, meaning Walmart issued an apology, but we don't know who that worker was. They're probably having a pretty bad day today, though. Want to be very careful. If you're going to be posting from your alternative accounts, you want to double check that before you do. Remember, Mitt Romney had a little issue with that when he was Pierre Delecto, right? Sort of getting on Twitter and interacting under a pseudonym, and kind of funny. So anyways, that's what's going on there. Walmart's angry. Now, we know that we have one senator now. Remember, we've talked a lot about this on this program. Well, what do you take? How do you object to the votes? Remember, the states have all certified the votes. The Electoral College members of the various respective states have cast their ballots. We went through that. A lot of the Republican states, the Republican electors also cast their ballots, and we had this conversation about dueling electors, which we'll talk a little bit about today. But what happened is all of those votes, the certificates of ascertainment from the electors, are going into Congress right now. Now, they've been cast, but they haven't been counted, and they haven't been certified. We all know what they say, but they haven't gone through the formal process. And that takes place next week on January 6th. And so what we've been sort of trying to identify is anybody going to object to those votes in a meaningful way? Is it going to be more than what we saw with Maxine Waters, just sort of, waving around papers on the floor? And we were analyzing what the rules say, and you need one person from both houses. You need one person from the House. You need one person from the Senate. And we've already gone through and indicated or found a number of different House representatives who are going to be objecting to this. Largely the spearhead of this has been Mo Brooks, I think from Alabama, and Mo Brooks has been rallying a lot of other individuals to join him. So the House is spoken for, but we've been really speculating about the Senate. Is anybody going to do it, right? Ted Cruz has kind of hinted that he's got some issues with the election. He was going to go in front of the Supreme Court and argue the oral arguments that were going to take place had the Supreme Court accepted that case. So he sort of hinted that he was going to go that direction. Rand Paul has been pretty outspoken about some of this stuff during a Senate hearing. He was kind of agitated, saying we're asking the wrong questions. This guy doesn't know anything that's pertinent to electoral fraud. And so, none of them came out first. Even a newly elected Senator Tuberville was really inching really close to that. But Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership in the Senate, they do not want this to happen. They do not want anybody to object to this, and we're going to explain why. So the fact that Josh Hawley is out now saying, yeah, I'm going to join, I'm objecting to this thing, it's a pretty big deal. right? Because now you have the two necessary components in order to successfully lodge an objection. And we're going to go through the rules and explain what happens next. Let's take a look first at another person joining the House. This was also posted today. Representative Jeff Duncan came out and said, on January 6th, I also plan to object to the Electoral College certification for the people of the 3rd District of South Carolina and the millions of Americans who are demanding transparency. And he issues a full statement. I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. 2020 election saw unprecedented institutional issues like states changing their voting systems in violation of the state constitution, unelected bureaucrats changing election law instead of lawmakers themselves, poll watchers prohibited from doing their jobs, failure to properly scrutinize the validity of mail-in voting, and the list goes on and on. We need to look into this. All Americans should be on board. He says, I plan to object to the Electoral College certification from states that experience these issues. States like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. I plan to object for the people of South Carolina. May God bless the USA. So now, I mean, just today, we have 2 indications from 2 different people in our Congress saying that they're going to object to it. So what does that mean? Well, we need to break that down. A couple quick points on this before we dive into the sort of the meat of the analysis is, number one, Republicans better be ready for this to be used against them in the future. Okay, what we're seeing right now, I think, is going to open the floodgates. The next election, the next presidential election, how can you not expect the Democrats to do the same thing? Sort of, this is turning up the volume in the room. And some people think for good reason. Some people say this is, political posturing. But now that we have confirmed objections from both chambers of Congress, I expect the Democrats to do the same thing, right? This is just politics. So as long as Republicans are comfortable with that, and I personally have no problem with that. I think that's fine, right? This is politics. It's a blood sport. Both sides should be willing to get in and get dirty. So, brace yourselves for that. The next time this goes around, any senator from the Democrats who's objecting, Republicans can't sort of, go, "Aw, shucks, this is ridiculous," because they raised the volume on this one. Now, the Democrats arguably have done the same thing in prior elections, but to my knowledge, they haven't really had senators do it, right? It was Maxine Waters, who was a House representative, and some other House representatives, which is, whether you want to admit it or not, the House representatives are sort of a lower tier, right? They have shorter terms, they have more members, and the Senate is a more prestigious position. So, they're saying that, well, now the Republicans are bringing the Senate into this. It used to just be a House objection. Now the Senate is involved, and so the Republicans better brace themselves when the shoe goes on the other foot. The other issue here is I'm very curious to see what happens. Is there going to be sort of a domino effect? Now that one senator has sort of broken the dam, are we going to see a floodgate of other senators running in and wanting to join in on the feeding frenzy? Okay, in my opinion, this is the start of the 2024 election. That's really what Josh Hawley's trying to accomplish here. He's trying to get out front and say, look, I want to inherit the mantle of populism. I want to be Trump version 2.0. I want to do what's best for the people. And that sort of mirrors a lot of the statements that we've seen from him out of Twitter. Last week when he passed or voted to pass the $2.4 trillion omnibus bill, his rationale was that we need to get Americans money. There's $600 here. American families need it. When he got criticized for it, he jumped right back on board and said, okay, $2,000 is fine. Both populist type of expressions, right? Rand Paul, by contrast, is saying we can't afford that stuff. And so you're starting to see this little division in the Republican Party. Who is going to inherit what issues and who's going to sort of try to capitalize on the mantle of President Trump's legacy? And looks like Josh Hawley is jumping in with both feet. So what we want to see now is Ted Cruz going to join in. What happened with Tuberville? He's already on the fence on some of this stuff. Is he going to be joining in and also objecting to the votes? Rand Paul might change his tune, and the list goes on and on. But now that this has happened, we got to understand how the process is going to unfold. And before we do, I just want to comment on, the idea here is that Mitch McConnell does not want this to happen. We're going to frame out how this process works, but what ultimately this is going to do, and it may not ultimately benefit the Republicans, right? If they go through this process, it may hurt them politically, but many people, myself included, think that there were a lot of problems with this election, and we need to give some attention to them. This seems to be like the only venue that is going to address it. Tried with the Supreme Court, tried with a number of other courts, tried with independent investigations. There's been some sort of bites, little tiny bites at the apple here and there, but I think largely a lot of the questions have gone unanswered. I think the Supreme Court could have helped clear a lot of it up. They refused to do so. So, all right, that's fine. They don't want to get involved in the political sort of components of how we govern ourselves. No problem. We'll just do it in Congress then. So I think the Supreme Court is partly to blame for this continual sort of back and forth biting between both parties, because they could have cleared a lot of this up. They could have told us that states can't just modify their rules. Judges just can't go in and change election deadlines like they did in Pennsylvania from the day of the election to 3 days later, just on their own, right? They did that. The Supreme Court obviously doesn't care about it. So now our politicians are going to have to duke it out in front of Congress and in front of the American people, which I'm okay with, perfectly fine with that. Mitch McConnell, though, is not. Mitch McConnell is concerned that the process is going to show that now that there's an objection, if Josh Hawley, as he says he's going to do, objects to one state's votes and another House representative also objects to those votes, well, what happens is that joint session of Congress then breaks up, and both houses will go back to their respective chambers, and then they're all going to vote. They're all going to have to put their money where their mouth is. They all talk big games, but now they say if they're objecting to Pennsylvania and that goes back into the Senate, Josh Hawley's going to vote to object to those votes. What is Ted Cruz going to do? What is Rand Paul going to do? What are all of these presidential hopefuls, these other Republican senators, what are they going to do? Right? It kind of puts them in a difficult position. We know the Democrats are going to vote no across the board, so it's not really asking them to take a hard stand, but it is asking the Republicans to do so. If they vote to exclude those state votes, then they may win the favor of the Make America Great Again crowd, the Trump people, because they're objecting to the votes. Now that may hurt them with some other independents in a general election situation. If they do the reverse of that, let's say they say, well, I have a lot of concerns about this election, but I'm going to vote to count those votes. Now they're on record. It's documented. They're on a list somewhere. The next time that they're running for re-election, they're probably going to get primaried. It's probably going to be somebody from sort of the Trump extension of, that movement, and they may not get reelected. They may get primaried out of the election. And so Mitch McConnell, his only real objective that I've ever seen from the guy is he wants to maintain the Senate, right? It's all about political power, largely why he's an effective Senate leader, because that's all he thinks about, right? He's just constantly thinking about votes and maintaining the majority. So when something like this happens and it's asking the senators to go on the line and take a hard stance one way or the other, that's difficult. They don't want to answer hard questions. It's too damn bad, in my opinion. This is what they're there for. This is where they make their money. They're supposed to make hard decisions. They're not supposed to read a bill that's 5,500 pages long in 2 hours and vote on it and not ever even read it or look at it. Okay, that's not what we put them there for. We put them there to know how we want to know where you stand. We want to know what you're going to do about this stuff. Let's see. Let's just lay it out all on the table. And so last week I was very critical of Josh Hawley, but this time, hey, Josh, nice job. Way to redeem yourself and come back. So a lot of exciting things going on. And the next week is going to be lit, folks. It's going to be lit. So let's get into some of the analysis here. So now that we know that Congress is looking like they're going to be objecting to this thing and both houses are going to do it, we've got one senator and one representative. What do the rules say? Okay, we spent a lot of time talking about the rules. We talked about counting electoral votes. We've talked about the new lawsuit where Rep. Louis Gohmert is suing Mike Pence because Mike Pence is the president of the Senate and he's going to be involved in the ceremony. They're trying to hash out what are his rights, what's he allowed to do, can he accept one slate of electoral votes versus another slate. And so the courts are trying to figure this out, right? The Congress people, the senators, they're all trying to figure it out. And if you read a lot of the news articles, I was reading an article on Politico this afternoon, and they were saying, the experts that we've consulted are also kind of scratching their heads about this because there's a lot of ambiguity in the law. So what I want to run through to sort of help ease this process is a document that was prepared by the Congressional research service that informs legislative debate, according to them, since 1914. So this is an official government entity that helps present reports for Congress, sends these reports to the Congress people, and they make them available to the American public. And they're just sort of trying to interpret the rules in a way that's a little bit more easily able to digest than you would get from just reading the statutes. Remember, we have gone through these statutes before. If you're new to the channel, you may have missed that, but in a prior video, we went through these statutes kind of line by line, and we're trying to analyze how it works. And this is a separate report. Sort of, we haven't gone through this in any detail, but it is a little bit easier to understand. It is still a lot of legalese, but let's go through it. This is what Congress is looking at when they're trying to educate themselves on these debates. So this is the title of the document. If you want to read the full thing, I would really encourage you to do it. There is a link in our slides, or you can just type this into Google and it should pop right up. But the title of it here is Counting Electoral Votes, an overview of the procedures at the joint session, including objections by members of Congress, right? Sounds exactly pertinent. We're looking at having a joint session next week, and now we know that there are going to be objections from both houses. Now, this was updated on December 8th, 2020, so this is sort of the definitive-ish document on this, but even what they say here is that it's messy. It's not very clear. So what they're talking about, and this is a long document. I would really encourage you to read the whole thing if you're interested in this stuff. But what I've done here is just sort of clipped out the pertinent parts. And let me just run through it. Going to be a lot of text that we're going to be analyzing here, so bear with me. It says here, much of what follows in this report is based on the Constitution, particularly Article 2, Section 1, Amendment 12, and the Electoral Count Act of 1877. Okay, it's a long time ago. That act is old. It was originally acted in 1887, and then in 1948, it was amended and codified into Title 3 of the U.S. Code. So you can see why this is kind of messy, right? A lot of different areas of laws are having to interplay with one another. This report says it also references congressional precedent and practice. So they're also looking back to say, how were these electoral votes counted back in the earlier days before these laws were codified? Remember, this was codified in 1887, but we were running elections for 100 years before that. So they were looking to other precedent to say, okay, well, if we don't really know, if we have some ambiguity about the current law, maybe we can look to prior circumstances. How did they run that election, or there was a similar issue? Maybe we can get some guidance from history and use that in our application today. So they're talking about, this record, different disputes, the codifying of the law procedure in 1887, different precedents. They're saying, largely here, due to the absence and specific and persuasive authority on some issues, and in the interest of brevity, this report attempts to at least identify and present some of the possible issues and questions, even when not necessarily resolving them by reference to an authoritative source or material. The topics are arranged in approximate order of their occurrence. So let's dig into it. The first part I want to cover here says objecting to the counting of one or more electoral votes. So how does this work? Section 15 establishes the procedure. We've already covered Section 15 on this channel. It says it details how to make and act on objections to the counting of electoral votes from one state or DC. When a certificate or the equivalent, which is the certificate of ascertainment, comes in front of the Senate, the president of the Senate shall, quote, call for objections, if any. So that's in the rule according to Section 15. Any such objection must be presented in writing. It must be signed by at least one senator or one representative. So we know we have that, right? We've got Josh Hawley. We've got the other House representative we talked about today, along with Mo Brooks, and many others of them. The objection says, quote, it shall state clearly and concisely and without argument the grounds thereof the objection. So you don't get to go on there and make a big show of this. You have to state very clearly what your objection is. And there's some precedent that there has been attempts to halt argument that take place on the House floor. So let's go back to the Maxine Waters example, since that's the one that's sort of in most recent memory. In 2016, she came to the floor and she had her piece of paper that was written. Her objection was presumably on there. She didn't have a senator to join her, but she started to try to talk and make an objection, and she was sort of limited from doing that. So on several occasions, this document says there have been attempts to make speeches, and those have been halted. However, when an objection properly made in writing and endorsed by at least one senator and one representative is received, each house is to meet and consider it separately. So remember, they come together for a joint session. We've sort of detailed this a number of times here, so I apologize if it's repetitive, but this is important. This is happening next week. what happens is those certificate of ascertainments come into the joint chamber, and the Vice President, Mike Pence, who is the President of the Senate, is opening those. As he's opening them, he's going to be calling for objections. Now, both houses are together. If you have the one senator, one representative, then they will break back out into their own separate houses. So they're not doing a joint session anymore. And when that happens, there's a whole set of different rules that are triggered. It says here, quote, no votes or papers from any other state shall be acted upon until the objections previously made to the votes from any state shall have finally been disposed of. So this means it stops the process, right? There's 50 states. They got to count all 50 votes. If you say I don't know how they're going to start. It's a good question. We should probably understand, where are they going to start with this stuff? But if they start with the A's and Arizona's right at the top, they want to object to Arizona's votes. That means at that point in time, they break, right? And so it could turn into a very, very long day. They're going to break, and they're going to go into their separate houses and have a debate about it. It says disposing of objections. The next paragraph I want to cover, it says the joint session does not act on any objections that are made. Instead, the joint session is suspended. The Senate withdraws from the House chamber. Each house meets separately to debate the objection and vote whether, based on the objection, to count the votes or the votes in question. Both houses must vote separately to agree to the objection by simple majority. Otherwise, the objection fails and the vote or votes are counted. And that's under U.S. Code Section 15. It provides that the two houses concurrently may reject the vote or votes. So they have to agree on that. And many people, this is sort of where the rub is. Republicans control the Senate. There's a special election, I believe, kind of having a blank on the date, but I think it's January 5th, which is the day before this, right? And we're going to have a new Congress that takes place on January 3rd. They're going to come into the House, and the Republicans don't control the House. The Democrats do. So if you need both houses to agree to this, Republicans control the Senate, the Democrats control the House. How do you get both houses to agree? Well, remember, the margin is much smaller now in the House. The Republicans actually picked up seats in this last election, which is causing many people to scratch their heads. Why was there a big red wave across this country, but Donald Trump still lost the election? Doesn't make a lot of sense. How did the Republicans gain a bunch of seats in the House, although they still don't have the majority, but they did increase the margin? They were in the minority by a much bigger number than they are now. And so, if there's some inkling that a Democrat might switch over to the Republicans and vote in the House by simple majority to throw out the votes, I haven't seen it yet, right? We just haven't seen that material. Democrats largely vote in lockstep. The Republicans are the ones who are always asking questions about Mitt Romney and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. The Republicans have a lot of squishy members in their caucus. The Democrats, not so much, right? There's an order from Nancy Pelosi. Boom. It's followed almost to the T. So on something as big as this, are they going to ever, in any conceivable universe, object to any state's votes? In my mind, the answer is probably no, but we still have a little bit of time. There's a lot of information coming out. Some of these independently minded Democrats, some of these red state Democrats, right, if they can peel off a handful of them, it may be enough to ultimately disqualify the votes. But as we see, according to USC Section 15, Title 3, the two houses must concurrently vote together in order to disqualify those votes. So what is the procedure then for considering these objections? So now we know that you need one person from each house. It's a process where they break off into their own independent houses. What are the procedures? Well, this next section in Section 17 lays out the procedures to follow. These procedures limit the debate on the objection to not more than 2 hours, during which time each member may speak only once and for not more than 5 minutes. Then it, quote, shall be the duty of the presiding officer of each house to put the main question without further debate. Under this provision, the presiding officer in each house held in 1969 that a motion to table the objection was not in order, which means they get the full time to debate this stuff, right? 2 hours. They each get 5 minutes. We saw this with, what representative was that? There's another representative who was trying to rally, I think, 75 House representatives to all go and talk for 5 minutes so that they could really just delay the process, right, and carry it over onto January 7th, 8th, 9th, whatever that may be. And so they get 2 hours, 5 minutes apiece per objection. Okay, so if they're objecting to 6 states, it's a lot of time, right? It's a full day. So we may not have an answer on January 6th. Or is Josh Hawley just going to object to Pennsylvania? Right? So only that one would be 2 hours. If that were the case, then what Josh Hawley's doing, I think, is sort of irrelevant. Because even if you threw out Pennsylvania, I think Joe Biden still has enough to be over the 270, which that's the whole point of objections. Remember, we don't want to lose sight of that. Just because a senator and a House representative object to the votes doesn't mean that the election is reversed. It just means that those state votes, those electoral votes, don't count. So right now, Joe Biden is over 300. In order for this to have really any meaning, they got to get that under the 270. They got to drop it under the 270 threshold. That's what would trigger a contingent election. So if Josh Hawley is only going to object to Pennsylvania, and he's only joined by one representative, and they're not going to object to any of the other state votes, even if Pennsylvania is agreed upon and they throw Pennsylvania's votes out, Joe Biden still wins. He's over 270, right? So it needs to be more than that. And according to Josh Hawley's own statement, we don't know that it's going to be. He only mentioned Pennsylvania in there. Is he going to object to anything else? Is this going to be a symbolic objection that doesn't change anything? Or is he going to go onto the floor and object to a slew of the misconduct that we've seen in a number of different states? More will be revealed on that. All right, another issue that is explained here is this idea of receiving 2 dueling certificates of ascertainment. So we talked about the dueling electors. If in Arizona, well, we had this, I think also in Nevada, a number of other states, when the electors were meeting together and going to cast their ballots cast their electoral votes for Joe Biden, many Republican GOP electors were also holding simultaneous sort of parallel certificate of ascertainment proceedings. So they were also signing their electoral votes for President Trump, who they believe rightfully won based on the fraud and misconduct that they've seen in their localities. And they submitted those certificates of ascertainment into Congress to be counted. And so what happens when Mike Pence is looking at 2 different competing slates of electoral votes, looking at the ones that were certified by the governor supporting Joe Biden and looking at the other ones that were supported by the GOP that were sort of outside of the official process, but they think that they're the legitimate certificates? What happens? Well, let's go look to the law. It says the receipt of 2 certificates from the same state. What happens? Well, historically, prior to 1887, Congress was particularly concerned in the statute of 1887 with the case of 2 lists of electors and votes being presented to Congress from the same state. They have 3 different contingencies to be provided for in the statute for 2 lists. In the first instance, 2 lists would be presented. The assumption presented in the law is that only 1 list would be from electors who were determined to be appointed pursuant to the state election contest. That's in U.S. Code Section 5. That in such case, only those electors should be counted. Okay, so it's whatever is certified. In the second case, there are 2 lists proffered that come from 2 different state authorities who arguably made determinations provided for under U.S. Code. So that would be like a state governor and a state legislator, both certifying the election, both sending different slates of electors. The question of which the state authority is the lawful tribunal of the state to make the decision shall be decided upon by a concurrent agreement of both houses. So that's a little bit different, right? So now if you have a dueling set of electors, let's say in that situation, Mike Pence gets Arizona's official electoral votes and Arizona's unofficial electoral votes. Those both end up in front of the House. Both houses have to agree which ones to take. They have to agree on that. So we sort of run into the same dilemma, right? If they're objecting to just throwing the votes out entirely, that's one form of an objection. But the other form would be to just say, well, we don't want those states' votes to be thrown out. We just want ours to be counted. So now you're not trying to get Joe Biden under the 270. You're trying to take votes away from him and flip those over to Donald Trump, right? So that would actually change the course of the election. So it's a little bit different. On the one side, one argument is you want to knock any candidate under 270. That triggers the contingent election. That's where the House of Representatives votes 1 state, 1 vote. Donald Trump has more states. Donald Trump becomes the president. That's one theory, okay? And that would trigger a contingent election. But if there were a possibility of going a different route, in other words, if the Senate and the House agreed to not take the certified electoral votes, but instead take the uncertified votes, they just come to an agreement, then you may not even need a contingent election, right? You could have a situation in which those votes, those electoral votes, are taken out of Joe Biden's bucket and put into Trump's bucket. But you got to have a concurrent agreement of both houses. In the third instance, there is no determination by a state authority of the question of which slate was lawfully appointed. The two chambers must agree concurrently to accept the votes of one slate of electors, but the two chambers may also concurrently agree to not accept the votes from that state. So that's, it gives us a little bit more guidance on that. Mike Pence, in this case, would have to take the votes of whatever the both houses decide on. They could agree to not count them. They could agree to pick one slate over another, or they could just agree to count them. We'll see what happens. Now, another interesting question that came up yesterday, and I didn't really know what the answer was, and I still think I was mostly kind of right about it. The question here was, well, do they have to have, what kind of evidence do they have to object to the votes? So what's Josh Hawley going to base his evidence on? I think it's a very pertinent question. Okay, well, if he's going to be objecting to it, what's the reason? What's the basis for it? Are you saying that there was actually fraud in this case? Because his statement didn't really say much of that, right? We don't see that in his statement. Let's back up to it real quick. So in his statement, let's take a look. There it is. It says, I cannot vote to certify the Electoral College results without raising the fact that some states, particularly Pennsylvania, failed to follow their own state election laws, okay, which I would totally agree with on that. I cannot vote to certify. He talks about Facebook. He talks about Twitter. He talks about interference by them in support of Joe Biden. All true. They should investigate allegations of voter fraud and adopt measures to secure the integrity of the elections, but they've failed to act. So it's a very careful statement there, right? He's not saying this election was fraudulent, this election was stolen. He's not saying any of that stuff. He's just saying, well, they didn't follow their own rules, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there was fraud. I think that it's a form of fraud in my own mind. I mean, I've made that argument ad nauseum on this program, but he's not actually coming out and saying, Brad Raffensperger wasn't checking the ballots in Georgia, wasn't checking the signatures, or observers were thrown out. He's not making a lot of the same claims that we are hearing in other lawsuits and in other legislative hearings. So what is the basis then, Josh? If you're going to be objecting to this, what can you object over? Well, the Congressional Research Service does give us some guidance. It says here, the basis for the objections, according to the U.S. Code, the general grounds for an objection to the counting of the votes, it's pretty broad. It says from the federal statute and from historical sources that a vote was not, quote, regularly given by an elector, or that the elector was not, quote, lawfully certified according to the state statutory procedures. So very, very, very broad. This goes on. It says the provision reiterates for clarity that both houses concurrently may reject a vote when not, quote, so regularly given by electors, quote, so certified. So again, very, very broad, right? Huge. What does regularly given mean? What does lawfully certified mean? Very, very expansive. And I think that basically any reason that you want, you can come up with in a situation like this, right? You can find a lot of irregularities. You can make a lot of arguments here that stuff was not lawfully certified. The arguments have been made. We've been making them here for a long time. If a court undermines the will of the legislature and just does whatever they want, and the Constitution grants the legislature all of the power to conduct and manage their elections, and the court does something that goes directly adverse to what the legislative body wanted, is that a lawful maneuver of the rules? I was hoping the Supreme Court would tell us, but they didn't. They just wanted to go about their business and not answer one of the most pertinent questions of the year, probably of, election history. Can this stuff continue to go on? They just decided to phone it in and not give us any clarity. All right, so we moving on. We're about to wrap up on this portion of the broadcast, so thanks again for bearing with me. It says electoral vote timetable and the subsequent action. All right, so now what happens? So now Congress has established a timetable for certification, transmission, review, approval of the electoral votes to avoid a repetition of the extraordinary delay that took place in 1876. In the event that no candidate has received a majority of electoral votes for president, the election is ultimately decided by the House of Representatives, in which the names of the three candidates receiving the most electoral votes, with each state having one vote, is decided. It's considered by the House. In the event that no candidate receives a majority of the electoral votes for vice president, the names of the two candidates receive. Okay, so that goes over to the Senate for the vice president. But again, they're talking right here about the contingent election. If the objections are sustained and there's no sort of dueling elector swap, one set of ascertainment certificates are accepted in lieu of another, the goal is to drop Joe Biden's total electoral vote count under 270. That triggers the contingent election. That transmits it over to the House. They get to decide who the next president is. The Senate gets to decide the vice president. So we'll see what happens. Now, what is President Trump and his campaign going to do? This article was posted over on the Epoch Times, and it says they want to present, quote, specific evidence next week on January 6th, according to their campaign advisor, Jason Miller. President Donald Trump's campaign advisor said the team is aiming to present evidence during a potential congressional debate on January 6th if lawmakers in the House and the Senate object to the votes, which presumably they are going to do. As of Wednesday, Josh Hawley is going to do it. A number of House lawmakers are also going to do it. He said he's going to object based on the fact that Democrats did the same thing in 2004 and 2016. Miller said that the evidence could be presented in Congress, which would differ from what the Trump campaign presented in courts over the past several weeks. And he says here, quote, "We will have a chance in front of the American people next week to present these cases, all these evidence of fraud," Miller told Newsmax, pointing to a lawsuit filed by Rep. Louis Gohmert against Mike Pence. We talked about that one yesterday. He told the outlet that the president of the Senate gets to decide how that all works, and he hopes that they will join in on the objection to allow 2 hours of debate. So, folks, next week is going to be a ride, so buckle up. Should be interesting. We're going to see if we can add some value to the conversation as it is progressing, but I'm expecting sort of a lot of activity leading up to January 6th. Put it that way. All right, let's change gears just a little bit. We're still going to talk about some of this election stuff, but as I mentioned at the opening, Donald Trump did file a new lawsuit in front of the Supreme Court. It's a new filing, so it's a petition for a writ of certiorari, which is now in front of the Supreme Court. So he's got a couple cases that are literally on the door, knocking at the door at the Supreme Court. Hey, let us in. Come hear us. We've been trying to get you to answer. The American people want some clarity on how this stuff works, and can you help us out? So we'll see if they'll accept it. As a reminder, the Supreme Court doesn't have to hear cases. Okay, when Texas was suing Pennsylvania, they just said, no, you don't have any standing. We're not going to hear the case. Even though, like 17 states joined in on that. Hundreds of other public officials were joining in on that. Had a lot of legitimacy in my mind. They just said we're not going to opine on that. So this one is still knocking on the door. No indication yet that they're going to hear it. No indication that they're going to expedite the process so that this gets settled and heard before January 6th. This is just the filing. So this is what it looks like. It's Donald Trump et al. Versus Joe Biden. So it's sort of consolidating a lot of similar claims. It's a petition for a writ of certiorari. It's filed yesterday. You can get the full document. It's a couple hundred pages on Donald Trump's website. They made a public version available. So once again, what I want to do here, we've covered probably, 20 different lawsuits, election lawsuits on this channel, a lot of them. We've seen a lot of the claims, very similar claims, sort of repeated over and over. The analogy that I've used here is the turkey sandwich analogy. Okay, some turkey sandwiches have bacon and avocado. Some of them have lettuce, tomato, and mustard and mayo. Okay, but they're both a turkey sandwich. Little bit of difference in the condiments. Both kind of taste the same. Both are delicious. Both are nutritious, but they're a little bit different. And so a lot of these election lawsuits have been in that mold. And I want to just kind of gloss over the majority of it and point out a couple of the highlights. So we're going to do that here as it relates to this lawsuit. Most of this lawsuit is surrounding issues that took place in Wisconsin. So they're appealing a lot of different issues from Wisconsin that were sort of resolved by their Supreme Court. So remember, you have a state Supreme Court. They heard the claim. Trump campaign is appealing all of those claims to the highest authority in the land, the United States Supreme Court. So they're talking about a couple different issues here. Number one is going to be this issue that we've talked about a lot on here, that in Wisconsin, they were encouraging people to use this very, very obscure provision of the law that says if you're indefinitely confined because of COVID, then all of the voting requirements are waived, right? You can't go and confirm your signature. You can't go and provide, get a picture. There's a lot of things you can't do if you're indefinitely confined. And so the argument here was that this law was applied in a way that it shouldn't have been applied, right? The underlying basis of the law was that, yeah, you have to like literally be indefinitely confined. You're an injured person, you're wheelchair bound, you're, terminally ill, and you physically can't leave. And so what they were doing in Wisconsin is just saying, if you're afraid of going outside because of COVID, then just go onto a website and just, fill out this voter registration form. You don't even have to upload your ID or anything like that. Just put, I'm indefinitely confined because the governor said so. And there you go. Which, of course, in my mind is just rampant for fraud, right? You can, if you don't have to identify yourself, you just go on and fill out an online form. Nobody checks, nobody cares because the law allows you to do that. Then that's a pretty big problem. That's not what the law was in place for. That's not what actually the law says, but that's what the interpretation was. Okay, the election people were just sort of putting out into the world, yeah, just go use this. You're allowed to do it because that's what the law says, but that wasn't really right. So let's take a look at what this lawsuit from Trump says. It says voters were encouraged to lie to avoid the photo ID requirement using COVID-19 as an excuse. And we saw this, we've covered this one already, but I think it's an interesting claim, so let's go through it again. Under Wisconsin law, clerks are responsible for ensuring that only qualified voters receive absentee ballots. They must be guard against prospective voters abusing the ability to avoid supplying photo ID on the basis that they claim to be, quote, indefinitely confined because of age, physical illness, or infirmity, or is a disabled person for an indefinite period. That's what the law says. So what happened here is they just sort of lumped everybody who was impacted by COVID into that bucket. The list of voters thus entitled to vote without supplying photo ID, quote, shall be kept current through all possible means, and, quote, the clerk shall remove the name, end quote, of anyone on the list who, upon receipt of reliable information that the voter is no longer qualifies as indefinitely confined. So Wisconsin's supposed to keep a very extensive list on how this stuff works. Rather than monitor the list of indefinitely confined voters for abuses, clerks in Milwaukee instead use all possible means to encourage voters to falsely qualify under this exception. On March 25th, clerks issued statements advising the public that because of COVID-19, quote, safer at home, precautions were issued by the Wisconsin governor. Prospective voters were entitled to declare themselves indefinitely confined under Wisconsin statutes due to illness, thereby avoiding the legal requirement to present or upload a copy of the voter's proof of identification when requesting an absentee ballot, right? So this was just clerks. The legislature didn't just, tell them to go do this stuff. This was clerks. They were manipulating the rules a little bit, just saying you get to just go qualified this way. And I think we covered this one previously. I think it was out of Wisconsin, but there was even some government official who posted on Facebook, right, saying, hey, just click on this website and you can go right over there. When it says upload your ID, just skip that box because you just have to certify that you're indefinitely confined. Well, if anybody wanted to falsify an election or fraudulent, commit fraud in an election, it's a pretty damn good way to do it. You're telling me that I can just go on a website and I can upload as many voter files as I want and nobody's going to check any of this stuff? Just put in all the names you want. Rob Gruler, Robbie Gruler, Bobby Gruler, Robert Gruler, all the different permutations of the name. And is anybody checking? Is anybody doing anything? I don't have to upload any ID. I don't have to confirm I am who I am. The government itself said I could do that, but that's not what the underlying law said, which is a problem. The lawsuit goes on. It says the Wisconsin Supreme Court tolerated these deviations from the manner in which the legislature directed the election to be conducted. So the Supreme Court allowed these manipulations to take place, even though the legislature had said previously, we don't want that to happen. On December 1st, 2020, one day after the Wisconsin Election Commission found, following the recount, that the Biden-Harris ticket had received 20,000 more votes than petitioners filed for immediate review in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, invoking its original jurisdiction. According to the statutes, they concluded that Section 901, this is according to Judge Brian Hagedorn on the Supreme Court there in Wisconsin, he said that the statute required that all challenges to the result of a recount must be decided to an appeal filed through the circuit court. In his opinion, in a 4-3 majority, he declined, with one exception, even to review the merits of the circuit court's ruling on the petitioner's objections. So they file it in front of the Supreme Court. He says, no, you have to go through a circuit court. They go through the circuit court, goes back up to the Supreme Court. Then the Supreme Court says, we're not even going to review the case. Okay, so they were following his formal proceedings, 4-3 majority opinion. He issued this decision, notwithstanding their ruling 11 days earlier, saying that per the Wisconsin legislature, an aggrieved candidate has an appeal as of a right from a recount. As to the objection to 17,000 ballots in Madison, they were not returned by mail or in person to the clerk's office. 4,000 ballots in Dane, Milwaukee counties that have been missing or altered ballot certifications. The majority found that these objections were barred by the common law doctrine of laches. The justices said they could have brought the suit earlier, even though they had no harm. Right? How could they bring a lawsuit when they had not been harmed yet? So they've identified 17,000 ballots here, 4,000 ballots there, 4-3 ruling. They went through the entire official process. Court just says, oh man, laches, you should have brought that sooner. Isn't that a shame? If they would have brought it sooner, what would their response have been? We've seen this. You don't have standing. You haven't been harmed yet. Why are you suing us yet? Why are you suing us for electoral fraud when you haven't even been defrauded yet? So, not so good on that one. The lawsuit goes on again. They're asking that the Supreme Court, they're saying that the Supreme Court decision that invokes the doctrine of laches to avoid a merits decision violates Article 2, threatens free speech and due process rights. So they're saying the Supreme Court here in Wisconsin should have actually heard the case. Justice Bradley was correct. So this is a different judge, probably I think in the dissenting opinion. So it was a 4-3 opinion in the Supreme Court. Justice Bradley was correct in warning of grave consequences for our nation, and particularly for the rule of law, if the decision below is left undisturbed. Petitioners properly, timely invoked Wisconsin statutes. They entitled them to judicial review as a matter of right, well-documented claims, sizable number of ballots, more than enough to make a difference in the election. They were cast in violation of mandatory Wisconsin statutes, but the majority opted to, quote, throw the cloak of laches over the case and refused to resolve the merits. Confidence in the election, confidence in the integrity of our electoral process is essential to the functioning of our participatory democracy. And the courts just didn't get involved here. Troubling. We have the lawsuit goes on. The Wisconsin Supreme Court violated Article 2 by upholding the counting of 50,000 absentee ballots at issue. Once again, they go back to the plain language of the Wisconsin statutes. They're saying that 50,000 absentee ballots are illegal and they may not be counted. As explained in pages 12 through 15, there were 17,000 ballots that were clearly cast in violation of mandatory chain of custody rules. We've talked a lot about that here because they were neither mailed by the voter nor were they returned to the clerk's office in person. They were instead deposited in drop boxes or they were scooped up by ballot harvesters, once again in violation of Wisconsin statutes. Another 4,400 absentee ballots were picked up that way. 21,000 ballots were in two categories, and they exceeded the margin of error between the two candidates. Supreme Court didn't hear it. They didn't want to hear any of that stuff there. They just said laches. We can't hear any of this stuff. So what are they asking for? So this is where things get a little bit dicey, right? I've been a little bit critical about matching the harm. I think there's been clearly some fraud, clearly some harm that took place in this election. But what is the remedy? What are they asking the court to do? Here we go. This is where the courts have problems with this stuff. The court should set aside the Wisconsin election as, quote, failed under U.S. Code Section 2, Title 3. It says, thus affording the Wisconsin legislature explicit statutory authority to appoint presidential electors to represent Wisconsin. As previously indicated, petitioners request the court consider this petition and related petitions that have been or will be submitted. They're asking that the court hold, quote, Wisconsin failed to make a choice on the day prescribed by law, and thus its electors may be appointed on a subsequent day in such a manner as the legislature of such state shall prescribe. So the remedy here they're asking for is just to say those votes don't count. Okay, we cannot count them. The election was failed. It was fraudulent. Therefore, Wisconsin legislature, you're up. You got to go and decide who gets these electoral votes at the end of the day. Finally, the last page here, you can see the attorneys. Troupis Law Office, James Troupis, submitted this for all the reasons stated. This court should grant certiorari, so hear the case, on an expedited basis, rule on the merits that under the plain language of the Wisconsin statutes and so on, they failed to make a choice of electors within the meaning of the U.S. Code, and now it's up to the legislature. We'll see what happens. Is the Supreme Court going to hear this one? Probably not. Are they going to rule on it quickly? Probably not. I think we saw the end of the Supreme Court's involvement at the end of the Texas case, but we'll continue to see what happens. And if they're updated, we'll let you know about that. So make sure you're subscribed if you're not already here. All right, the next story, as I said, there's a lot here, a lot of election stuff, is out of Georgia. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about the last election, okay, about 2 months now, a lot of it. Covered a lot of lawsuits, a lot of information, a lot of allegations, some good, some not so good. But there's another election right around the corner, and it is going to take place in Georgia on January 5th. So as we did before the last election, we were talking about the litigation. We were talking about the underlying lawsuits that were taking place to sort of change the rules. Remember, the Democrats were filing lawsuits all around the country. They were largely being funneled from Priorities USA down through the Retired Association People of America that has different factions in different states. So I have slides covering it. I've got receipts for all this stuff. We were talking about it before the election because we were speculating, well, why are they doing this? Right? Is it really COVID? Are they really concerned that grandma's not going to make it into the polling booth? Really? Well, in my mind, it was because they wanted to change the rules. They wanted to change the rules of the game in a way that favored their get out the vote organization or enabled them to do whatever they need to do to win in a way that the Republicans couldn't compete with. And they were successful. We saw this, right? Mark Elias over at Democracy Docket and many others were sort of spearheading this effort across the country. And it worked for them. So now we got to look at this next election, because some of the same stuff is going on a little bit. It's a little bit troubling. A judge out of Georgia blocks a voter purge in 2 Georgia counties. What does that mean? Well, this is the judge. This is Judge Leslie Abrams Gardner, who is the sister of Stacey Abrams. She's the judge on the federal circuit court, and she rejected the call for her to recuse herself. On Monday, she ordered 2 counties to reverse a decision that would have removed 4,000 voters from the rolls ahead of the January 5th runoff elections that will decide the ultimate control of the U.S. Senate. She is the sister of former gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. She's a prominent ally Stacey Abrams is a prominent ally of Joe Biden. She has led voter registration efforts across the state. Okay, so we have one judge who's deciding on what voting rolls should count. We have another woman who is her sister, also in the same state, who's leading voter registration issues. So Stacey Abrams is rallying and registering people to vote. Her sister judge just rubber stamping that down the road. Okay, no problem. Keep them on there. These are the 2 women we're talking about. This is Leslie Abrams Gardner. She is the judge of the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Georgia. She was appointed by Barack Obama, about 46 years old. She went to Yale and Brown University. She was an assistant U.S. attorney prior to taking the bench. On the right, we've got Stacey Abrams, who also went to Yale, and she is a Democrat. She was somebody who was a member of the Georgia House of Representatives for a period of time and was a minority leader there for about 6 years, from January 10th, 2011 to July 2017. And then she ran for governor in Georgia, and she lost by a small margin. And she attributed a lot of her loss to voter suppression. She was saying that her opponent was suppressing the vote across the state. So now she's very active in voter registration rolls. And this is the lawsuit. So this is a little bit confusing because we're talking about a lawsuit by people who want to reverse a lower body's decision to throw out votes. So let's break that down just a little bit better. All right, so this is the lawsuit. Once again, it comes from the Middle District of Georgia, out of the Albany division. It's 2 individuals, one by the name of Majority Forward and another individual named Gamaliel Warren Turner. They're suing, as the plaintiffs, the Ben Hill County Board of Elections. Right. So who are these people? Well, the plaintiffs here, Majority Forward, it's a nonprofit organization created to support voter registration and voter turnout efforts. So probably a Democratic organization. And a plaintiff is a permanent Georgia resident and registered voter in Muskogee. Is that it? Muskogee County? Defendants are Ben Hill, the County Board of Elections and Registration. So we've got the county boards who are being sued by a voter registration company. Okay, Majority Forward and this other individual are suing the actual electors board, right? And we've seen this around the country. We've seen Democratic organizations suing the Electoral Board, we saw them sue the Secretaries of State. They sued Jocelyn Benson out of Michigan. They sued Kathy Boockvar out of Pennsylvania. They sued Brad Raffensperger out of Georgia. And they're all doing it because they want to get the rules right. They want to get the rules in favor of them. Okay, the Republicans are not doing this. They probably should be, but they're not. And they responded to this. And then Judge Abrams Gardner, issued an opinion, issued an order, and said, this is what we're going to do. Let's talk about what they're actually fighting over. So on December 14th, according to her order, a guy by the name of Ralph Russell filed a challenge to the eligibility of 4,000 voters in Georgia. And he stated here, this is how he came to this conclusion. He said, the grounds for my challenge are that I have evidence that there are 4,000 individuals registered to vote in Georgia who reside outside of Georgia. The information was gathered by running the Georgia voter registration database against the National Change of Address Registry. I believe the individual's name, as a result of registering their name and change of address, I believe they were moved to another state, and they did so with the intention of making that their new residence. Thus, they have lost their ability to vote in Muskogee County, in Georgia. Not allowed to do that. So he submitted that. And this has been the same analysis that we've seen from a lot of individuals during this post-election season. We saw Matt Braynard doing the same thing. Basically, what they're doing is they're getting all of the official registration data from a state. They're comparing that with some other national registries, right? There's been the National Social Security Registry, tells you who died. So if they see a name on there who voted, and they're also on the dead list, that doesn't make so much sense. But what the list they're talking about here is the National Change of Address Registry. So anytime you move, you got to update your address with the U.S. Postal Service, right? You do that. Well, if you moved out of state, you shouldn't get to vote in that state anymore. So that's the list that he's identifying. He's sort of cross-referencing the two buckets. On December 16th, the Elections Board, they met to consider the challenge. Russell didn't attend the hearing, didn't provide any information, but the board voted by a margin of 3-1, saying that there was probable cause to support the challenge. So the Election Board heard that evidence and threw it out. Muskogee Board placed the names of 4,000 targeted voters on a list, and they said that they were entitled to vote under the Uniformed Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting mechanism. So they didn't just throw them out, but they said, okay, well, you look like you're out of state now, so we're going to give you an absentee voting. The board instructed any targeted voter, so that's anybody on the list, whose name appears on the list and who attempts to vote in person, to be advised of the challenge and to allow only them to cast a provisional ballot. Okay, so the Election Board in a 3-1 vote finds, okay, that's pretty compelling, right? You got a list of 4,000 names, 4,033 individuals in Georgia. They're on our voter registration rolls. You're showing us a different list from the National Change of Address form. They apparently moved. Okay, if they show up to vote, we're going to tell them. All right, well, you're going to cast a provisional ballot because we don't think you live here. That's what they're fighting over. The board made their decision. They got sued by this nonprofit. The Elections Board got sued by the nonprofit, hashed it out a little bit. Judge Abrams Gardner then issued the order. Let's break it down. Plaintiffs claim that defendants frivolously have challenged the eligibility of the voters in Ben Hill. So the nonprofit is saying this is frivolous. You're not allowed to do this. They're saying it's based on the National Change of Address Registry. They say that that is done in violation of the National Voter Registration Act and Georgia law. They're saying they improperly and impermissibly have found probable cause to sustain the challenges of 152 Ben Hill County voters and 4,000 Muskogee County voters, saying it's inaccurate, unreliable, and the data is inconclusive. They're calling it, according to the judge, a violation of the right to vote. They're saying here, there's a likelihood of success on their claims. They argue that the Election Board severely burdens the right of the vote by imposing unjustifiable barriers to casting a ballot in the runoff elections. The board's decisions, according to the judge, to sustain these challenges, she's concerned. She says it risks disenfranchising thousands of voters. As explained above, the challenges were submitted, here it is, less than a month before the runoff elections. Okay, so it's too late. You can't bring this lawsuit. They're also saying there is no evidence. Defendants received written confirmation from the voter change of address. The challenges did not include the individualized inquiries necessary to sustain the challenges that are made within 90 days of the federal election. Okay, there's a rule. It says you can't do that 90 days before an election. The declaration of I guess, indicates that targeted voters who may otherwise be properly registered may not have the means or the resources to travel to Georgia to resolve the challenge before the runoff elections. Additionally, the declarations of Burson and Essex indicate that targeted voters will have to vote by provisional ballots, which may not be counted. Okay, so, all right, well, it's too soon to the election, so you can't challenge those votes, those 4,000 votes. Also, they can't travel to Georgia. They moved out of state. And the declarations show that provisional ballots may not even be counted. So the judge says, nope, those 4,000 people who moved out of state, they're going to stay on the registry. She says here, it is so ordered, according to Judge Leslie Abrams Gardner, says defendants are enjoined from removing any challenged voters from the registration lists. Got to keep them on the list. They're also enjoined from preventing any targeted voters from casting a regular ballot. Cannot prevent them from showing up. Cannot prevent them from casting a regular ballot, not a provisional ballot. Defendants are enjoined from requiring any targeted voters to cast a provisional ballot or present any additional evidence. So they can't even ask them for any additional evidence. Defendants are also required to make reasonable efforts to inform all targeted voters of the terms of this restraining order. So they gotta notify 4,100 people about this stuff. So kind of a big win there for the Democrats. You've got a Democrat voter registration person out there rallying the votes. You've got a judge saying, hey, it's okay. Those 4,000 votes count. Pretty small margins out of Georgia. We'll see if that has an impact. But my guess is probably, because that's just how this all works. The other thing I wanted to talk about briefly, thought it was going to be more interesting today. Doesn't look like it's going to be. It says here we've got, yesterday we were talking about Mitch McConnell, about this $2,000 stimulus surplus that many people in Congress are debating over. Donald Trump wanted $2,000. The original bill was for $600. Yesterday during our broadcast, somebody mentioned that Mitch McConnell was actually going to be trying to accommodate Donald Trump's request. Donald Trump said, I'm not going to sign that bill. Then he turned around and signed it anyways. But what he wanted out of this was more funding for Americans. He wanted the $600 to go up to, I think, $2,000 for per individual and $600 per kid, something like that. And the House of Representatives passed that very quickly. Many people were wondering, well, what's the Senate going to do? Yesterday, we learned that Mitch McConnell said that he may actually take this up. He was going to talk about increasing additional rebates. He was going to talk about repealing Section 230 of the Communications Act and so on. So I was looking for that bill today because it said that he submitted this. And as of today, 12:30, the text has not been received for the bill. The bill is entitled A Bill to Amend the Internal Revenue Code to Increase 2020 Recovery Rebates, Repeal Section 230, and for other purposes. Generally, it's sent over, but they just have not gotten it yet. Okay, so this bill was introduced yesterday on 12/29. I just checked before the program. Still don't have the bill, so we don't know what's actually in there as far as I can tell. But McConnell does say that the House bill to increase COVID-19 has no realistic path in the Senate. Majority Leader again rebuffed Democratic calls on Wednesday to vote for a House bill that would increase COVID-19 payments by $2,000. Says he sees no realistic path, in quote, for the legislation. He proposed a new bill that would wed 2,000 payments to the repeal of Section 230, and it would lead an inquiry into claims of widespread voter fraud in the 2020 elections. Democratic leaders in the Senate have rejected this proposal, instead urging the Majority Leader to take up the House-approved bill. So exactly what we were talking about is going to happen. Donald Trump, signed that bill, sent it back down to Congress, expected them to do something about it. Both sides did something very token, knowing that nothing's going to happen, but the bill that has already passed is just going to move forward. So I really have no optimism on anything happening that's going to address Section 230. Not at all. Not real sure what the Senate's going to do with an increase in funding for the American people. Not particularly optimistic about that either. Both sides talked a good game, though, right? They both said, we're going to do a bunch of stuff. Trump said, okay, if you're going to do that, if you promise? Okay, then I'm going to sign this thing. And that didn't happen. That did not work. Don't expect it to either. So the last story of the program, before we jump into the super chats, it's a long one, folks, I told you, is my new personal hero, a guy by the name of Dave Biscobing, this is what he looks like. Look at that handsome fellow over there. ABC 15 investigator Dave Biscobing is one of Arizona's top reporters. This is according to his bio. You can follow him at Dave Biscobing 15 on Twitter. He's made a lasting impact in the community. He works to expose public corruption, hold officials accountable, and protect your tax dollars. Oh boy, I'm like swooning right now. This is like watching the Watcher's material, 100%. Dave Biscobing, I've been following him for a long time on Twitter, does very good work. Yesterday, he put out a stellar, about 45-minute long video series. I think it was a full presentation if you watch on cable on ABC 15, but of course none of us do that anymore. And so if you go on this website, you'll see this. So just go, if you want to find this, just go find him on Twitter. Give him a follow, Dave Biscobing, and you're going to see pinned on there or yesterday's stories a link to all of this information. So go give him a follow if you're interested in anything that's addressing public corruption, in particular police integrity and Brady problems. This is the guy to follow. He put out a slam dunk story last night. I watched it. I sent it to everybody here at our firm. I said, you got to watch this because it's that good. He says here, this is his story, the Brady list misconduct files for 100 plus Phoenix Police Department staff. So this is part one of his, I think, 7-part series. It says the Brady system is designed to track police officers with histories of lying and committing crimes, but why is it failing in our state? In an hour-long special, ABC 15 investigator Dave Biscobing reports on the failure of Arizona's law enforcement and prosecutors to effectively keep these lists. And I'm pretty happy about this, okay? In Arizona, it is a mess. When we're talking about Brady lists, we're talking about the idea that if an officer does something bad, well, we as a defense, we have a right to know about it. The Supreme Court has said so. If an officer has a history of lying, they charge our client with a crime, and we don't, how are we supposed to know about that, right? We don't manage these officers' personnel files. We don't work with these officers. They're all of this information is protected and governed by the state governments, by the local police departments. They have all of the cards. We don't see any of it. So the Supreme Court has said, if a police officer has something bad in their personnel file, it becomes what's called Brady material. It's evidence of lying, fraud, falsification. It's an integrity problem. We have to know about that because that opens up the door for us to attack that officer's credibility. But if we don't know about that because they haven't given us access to their files, we're sort of kept in the dark about it. Supreme Court says, no, if you're the prosecutor, you have a duty. You have an affirmative duty to tell us. You got to let the public know. You got to let the people who've been charged with the crime know that officer has a history of lying. That officer was also charged with the crime. That officer, didn't follow procedures and protocols the way that he should, and he was investigated by Internal Affairs. Right now in the state of Arizona, there are all these different lists around. None of the departments communicate with each other. We have a ton of different cities that have their own individual police departments. We have sort of an umbrella policy here known as AZ Post that is supposed to kind of be a clearinghouse for all of the misconduct across the state, but it doesn't really work like that. The different departments can just sort of voluntarily decide to disclose stuff or not disclose stuff. I talked about this 2 days ago on Civil Law's channel. I was explaining that in Arizona, I think our Phoenix Police Department, they were purging records for a long period of time. So if you were an officer who had any misconduct on your record, all you had to do was wait out the statute. You just had to wait a certain period of time. Your record would be purged. We've also seen a major problem here where one officer will get in trouble with one department, leave the state for a year or so, come back, go to a different department, or just move departments sort of just in real time. Got in trouble in Pinal County, go over to Maricopa County. Got in trouble in Maricopa County, go to Gila County, then go down to Pima, then go up to Coconino, and just bounce around because nobody's keeping track of these officers. Nobody is consolidating a list. And, we have a list here of officers that we keep, but it's internal. And there are certain rules that say that we can't disclose a lot of this stuff. If we see an officer who did something very bad, we're using it as part of our case, we can't just make that publicly available because it's not, there's all sorts of rules that say you can't disclose stuff unless it's, within the purview of your criminal case, and you have all these special permissions and the judge grants it and all these things. What they're trying to do is protect themselves from the public scrutiny. They do not want you to see what is really going on behind the scenes. Well, Dave Biscobing just said, that's too damn bad, my friends. And he released 100 personnel files or Brady files for 100 Phoenix PD staff. Just made them publicly available. Here you go. It's on ABC 15. And he also put together a list. I think, over 1,400 different officers throughout the history of Arizona who have had some sort of misconduct involved. Just put the whole list out there. Okay, stuff that we can't do. I've been really trying to sort of corral other defense attorneys to consolidate our list and share things, and it hasn't really picked up much steam because everybody has concerns about disclosure requirements and disclosure rules. Nobody wants to get in trouble. I don't blame him. Dave Biscobing, though, he doesn't have a bar license to worry about. He doesn't, this is just good investigative journalism. This guy is outstanding. Here is a little bit of his article. It goes on. It says, there is no official centralized Brady list in Arizona. Earlier this year, due to a lack of transparency and a legislative attempt to seal the information, ABC 15 published a searchable database of every law enforcement officer on the county Brady list current as of mid-2019. The unprecedented database contained roughly 1,400 enforcement officials. By cross-referencing the names to a roll of certified officers from AZ Post, that's that clearinghouse I was telling you about, it shows at least 220 officers were still on the job. The Phoenix Police Department, the state's largest agency, has the most officers on the list, 390, and the most listed as active, 106. Across the state, dozens of new officers are added to the Brady list every year. County attorneys in Arizona began keeping official Brady lists in Arizona about 20 years ago, records show. Each county keeps their own list in their own way. Some counties share information, but not all. A few counties only started keeping lists within the past decade and only name a few officers, records show. And I'll tell you this from my personal experience. I mean, I've watched prosecutors check their lists. Like when I'm sitting across the aisle from them, I'll say, hey, this officer, I heard bad things about this guy. Can you check your Brady list and see if he's on there? Anything I should know about? And that what they'll do is, yeah, let me find that for you. And somebody will email them over an Excel file, and they'll open up the Excel file and they'll scroll down. No, nobody's on that list. I'll say, well, where did that come from? Somebody just emailed, like, are you guys just like sending random Excel spreadsheet files around? Are they updated? I mean, if you've ever worked with an Excel file, you know that it's sort of hard to work on that stuff. That's why Google Sheets makes it all updated in real time, and now Excel does too. But they're just sending copies of copies of copies. So if somebody gets added to the list, are they going to just send that out to 1,000 different county attorneys across the state of Arizona? The investigation that Dave does is outstanding. He goes through, he talks to the police chief, Jerry Williams here, who by her own statements in her own interviews, I have questions about whether she even knows what Brady stuff is based on her response. Also talked to the county attorney here, who said she misspoke during a debate when she was saying that a judge gets to decide what is Brady material versus not Brady material. That's not true at all. It's the prosecutor's affirmative duty to disclose that stuff to us. So we've got the police chief, we've got the Maricopa County attorney, the chief prosecutor for the biggest county in our state, who don't know how any of this stuff works. And it shows. And it's been a huge problem. And so I'm extremely grateful to this type of journalism. I think this is what we need more of. I get so sick and tired of the copy-paste journalism that you see everywhere. Go on Washington Post, New York Times, CNN. It's the same stuff. Somebody writes a headline for the day. Somebody picks the word of the day, like seditious. You see a bunch of articles around that. They just copy and paste it. Okay, change a few things here and there, change the byline, add a little factoid here or there. It's the same stuff. This is real investigative journalism. This is outstanding work. It's speaking truth to power, and I'm very grateful for his work. My final slide of the program this is a little snippet from his list. This is what Dave Biscobing put together. So you can go find this stuff. It's all public record now. You can see the names on the list, right? We got this guy, Joshua Adams with the Phoenix PD, still active. Date added 2014. He had another one on 2016, still active. Joshua Allen, nobody knows what happened to him, corrections officer. A lot of these guys no longer unemployed. Jesse Abernathy, still employed, Phoenix PD. Okay, added Maricopa. Now, this stuff is changing all of the time. And a lot of the prosecutors in Arizona, or a lot of the county attorneys in Arizona, they're really, really slow to get this information out, and they get to decide what they think is Brady and what isn't. They look at it and they say, well, what'd that officer do? Well, that sounds like a mistake. That doesn't sound like dishonesty, does it? And they go to the officer and, yeah, it was a mistake. I wasn't being dishonest. They, have a little powwow with their other county attorney friends, and they say, well, that sounded like a mistake to me. Well, how about you there, Tom? Yeah, it was a good mistake too. Okay, cool. So there's no integrity problem there. He's not a liar. So we're just not going to add him to the list. We don't need to disclose that to the defense team. Wait a minute. I want to decide that. I want to be able to make that argument in front of a jury. I want to be able to tell the people who are involved in the case, yeah, this officer did this, and did this. Seems to be a pattern here. A lot of mistakes, or this guy's just a liar. But we can't talk about it. Fortunately, the hero journalist of the last year, Dave Biscobing, prompted that for us. So cheers, my friend. Well done on that. All right, let's jump into the super chats. We've got Adam K, who says, any hope that for the next election, the issues with lack of transparency and chain of custody won't repeat to the extent that it did this time around? I would hope so, Adam. I mean, I would think between now and the next election that the Republicans kind of pull their heads out of their rears, right? I've said this many times here. I think the Republicans got completely caught flat-footed. They were not prepared for the legal onslaught. I don't think that they were prepared at all for the boots on the ground interactions that needed to take place in order for them to gather the evidence to make their election fraud claims. I would hope that they would get their act together by the next election. And I think if this doesn't go their way, they will. Jeff Doe says, if Biden gets both the House and the Senate, can they make changes to the Constitution? Example, the First and Second Amendment. Yeah, I mean, Jeff, technically, yeah, they could. Remember, in order to amend the Constitution, it is a huge hurdle. I mean, a big one. You have to have 2/3 of both the Senate and the House, and then you have to have 3/4 of the states ratify the amendment. So the likelihood that we get a constitutional amendment on almost anything is probably very low. Now, they can do other things marginally around the edges, but I don't see them undermining the First Amendment or the Second Amendment to the extent that they probably would like to. So I think we're safe there. Unless they get both houses and then they pack the courts, then they can start passing some really strong legislation that infringes on those rights. And if the courts are packed with liberals, then they can just rubber stamp those modifications. That's the bigger concern. So we'll see. And Shay says, isn't Judge Abrams related to Stacey Abrams? Doesn't that make it a situation where she should step down from the case in Georgia? Thanks for having this show every day. I watch it every day. Go Buffalo. Go Buffalo and Shay. Yeah, so you're right. It is. Judge Abrams is directly related to Stacey Abrams. Seems to be a little bit of a conflict of interest there. Stacey Abrams is out there registering voters. Judge Abrams is out there saying those voter registrations are great. No problems there at all. Seems to me to be a little bit of a conflict of interest, but she didn't recuse herself from the case, and she found what she found. So we'll see what the Republicans do. Are they going to appeal this up? Are they going to fight back? Or are they just going to accept it and roll over like they did the last time? We have Wolfgang Deo who says, what's up, Wolfgang? He says, behave or I'm turning this year around. That's pretty funny. 2021, behave or I'm turning this year around. Thank God it ain't 2020. 2022, congratulations. You passed the simulation. Yeah. Nobody in 2021 wants to go back to 2020. I can tell you that. Thanks, Wolfgang. We got Manners who says, it looks like the US of A has already developed herd immunity against rational thought and evidence. Yeah, Manners, it's a lot easier to not think. It's just a lot easier to just live your life like an automaton. Okay, well, oh my gosh, what does Wolf Blitzer say? Wow, can you believe Trump did that? Awful. Anyways, what's next, honey? What do you want to watch tonight on Netflix, right? That's it. And so when they go to vote and they're asked to think about these questions, they just default to whatever is sort of programmed into their mind. I talk a lot about copy-paste journalism. It's intentional, right? They want you to absorb their opinions. They want you to watch all of the mainstream media and just sort of just gobble up their opinions, which is why I really don't watch much of it anymore. And this goes both ways, folks. It's not only with the left or the right, right? If you watch Tucker Carlson every single night and you just absorb his opinions as your own opinions, you don't have opinions. You have Tucker's opinions. Same with Rachel Maddow. Same with Wolf Blitzer. Same with any of these people. And so what we wanted to do on this program is analyze some stuff, right? If you have the same opinions as me, you don't have opinions. You got my opinions. I don't want you to have my opinions. My opinions change frequently. Sometimes I get off the program and my opinion has already changed. Okay? And I come back and I tell you about that. But, most people, they don't want to get too much thought in a lot of these issues. And I think that if they don't want to get involved, then that's fine. You're free to live your life a certain way, but don't complain about this stuff, right? If you're concerned that the Democrats are ruining the country and you're just asleep at the wheel in your life, at least as it relates to self-governance and politics, do you really have much of a right to complain about it? That's why I'm encouraging people to vote. Don't give up on the system. Let's just get back into the fight and modify the system in a way that we think better represents how we want ourselves to be governed. Thank you, Manners. Another one coming over from Liberty or Death. We've got Jim Bognet versus Bukvar, distributed for conference on January 15th. All defendants waived response. Number 207740. Thoughts? So I have not seen that one. That's interesting. Jim Bognet. I'm not sure who that is. So Kathy Bukvar is the Secretary of State out of Pennsylvania. I'd be very curious where that lawsuit is, but I will look that one up for sure. Maybe Miss Faith can see if she can find that and add a slide on that. But yeah, that is interesting. So January 15th, of course, the reason why that would be symbolic is because that is before Inauguration Day. It would be after January 6th when they count the votes, but it would be before Inauguration Day. Thanks, Liberty or Death. I'll take a look at that one. Love looking at those new lawsuits. We have Wolfgang Deo who says, have you considered talking about donut operator, angry cops at work, or Mike the cop? Might be interesting to have some popo on. I did an interview on this channel a long time ago with a former officer who was now working for the defense. And those are interesting conversations to have. I might see if I can find some additional ex-cops at some point when we start doing more interviews and more sort of different shows. Thanks, Wolfgang. Another one from Vegas. Mooch says, during the Georgia Senate hearing, Trump rep stated they hacked Fulton County city voting machine during their testimony and documented it, proving it's connected to the internet. Yeah, so Vegas Mooch, exactly. So there was a Georgia hearing today that took place, I think this afternoon, or at least I was seeing the headlines about it, that have some interesting graphics at least. I haven't watched it yet because I was prepping for the show, but it looked interesting. I think I know what I'm watching tonight, and it's going to be the Georgia legislative hearing from today. So we may be talking about that tomorrow. We have another one from Kathy DeMont who says, you want to see Biden haters and Trump haters come together in agreement, mention congressional term limits. Everything quiets down and we are all on the same page. Let's work on this. Good common ground. That's a good point, Kathy. I think I'd be open for that, right? If we can get some of these people out of, being lifelong politicians, get some fresh blood in there, I would be all for it. Are the Democrats for that stuff? If they are, we're in agreement on that. But we'll see. When you're in a position of power, why would you want to limit your position of power? We're asking Congress to put rules on themselves. It's like asking your 12-year-old, what time do you think is appropriate to come home? I don't have a 12-year-old, but when I was 12, I knew what the answer was, and it wasn't the same as my mom's. So is Congress going to self-limit? Probably not. But I would be all on board. We got Beth Coddington who says, hi, Robert. Thanks for all you do. On January 6th, should there be debates, will the overwhelming evidence prove the massive fraud be presented for all the naysayers to finally see? So, Beth, it's looking like that's what Trump, first of all, thank you, Beth, for that. I appreciate that. Thanks for being here. This is something that the Trump campaign has said that they're sort of inclined to do. I showed you that post from the Epoch Times where they were indicating that they did want to present evidence on January 6th. Now, how that is going to be structured, I just don't know yet. They all have 5 minutes. They have a 2-hour time limit. So, how much evidence are they going to be able to present? And what are the internal rules going to be there? Are they going to break off into private sessions? Is this going to be stuff that's broadcast on C-SPAN? I'm hopeful that it's all broadcast. I don't see why it wouldn't be. But, anything is up for grabs at this point. I would love for them to present the evidence. I think a lot of the American people have not seen it yet. I just got a haircut today. Look how good it looks. I was talking to Miss Amanda down there, and she was, talking about this. She has people in her chair all the time, and we were asking, we were having a conversation about the election, and she was saying that many people have never even heard of this stuff, never even heard of election fraud or the possibility of election fraud. Don't even know that there are lawsuits taking place, because if you go anywhere else on the regular media, they're not talking about it. It's just over. It's done and over with. You got to go and literally find this stuff. Otherwise, you're just going to be ignorant to it. And on January 6th, it may be the first time that many Americans even hear of this issue, unfortunately. We have Ken Yates, who says, in Georgia today, during the Senate hearing, a Dominion server was hacked in real time in Fulton County. Thought Dominion said they weren't online. Yeah, Dominion has been very, very careful with that language. We did listen in on, I think it was the Michigan hearing where the Dominion CEO was there, and he was talking specifically in opposition to that Antrim County audit, which said that they were connected to the internet. And he kind of gave two statements. He said something to the effect of they're not connected to the internet, or they're not designed to be connected to the internet. Very careful. But then later in the hearing, he sort of backtracked that a little bit and said, well, no, they can be connected to the internet, but the modems are outside of the machine. So I was talking about just the machine. Now we're talking about the modems, and there's seals on there, and they have to break the seal. And so it turned from a they're not connected to a, well, they are, but, and there's all these different contingencies on how it works. So it's convoluted, and that's by design, because it makes it difficult to get clear answers. Another one from Joseph Coles, who says, full audit of Georgia absentee ballots, live hack of the Dominion voting machine during the hearing, able to send and receive data, GA may flip. Wow. Okay. So I'm really watching that hearing tonight. I have not seen it yet, but I'm going to check that out tonight for sure. I saw a lot of very interesting things on Twitter this afternoon about that. So I'll be prepped on that one for tomorrow. Wolfgang Deo says, is it legal for me to disqualify a potential hire by asking the president, or by asking the question, who is the president? I mean, I don't want negativity on my team. That's a good question. I'm not an employment lawyer, so I don't know the answer on that one. But I'm just thinking about that in terms of being a business owner. I wouldn't ask that question, right? I just wouldn't ask that question. Politics, you kind of leave out just a little bit. There have been certain individuals who have worked here, who have total disagreements with my politics. That's fine. We were able to work together. There are still people who work here who have disagreements with me. It's fine, right? I like diverse opinions, and so I don't think I would single anybody out based on their political ideology. But I understand where you're going with that, Wolfgang. Term limits, remove them. They cause a gaming of the system like Obama did, as well as Bush and others. I think regulation needs to be removed. All right. Yeah. So I'm not saying if you want to remove term limits or if you want to remove the politicians, but I know where I stand on that one. White Buffalo says, Rob, do you have to have a quorum to vote on 1/6, or can they vote by proxy? You not there because of COVID, your vote does not count. Yeah. So that's interesting. I don't know. The only language that we saw that we just ran through was a simple majority. So is it a majority of the entire body, or is it a majority of the individuals who are present? I think you make good arguments both ways. We have Sharon who says, what happens if the houses can't agree on which slate of electors is the real or lawful slate? In this case, there's so much unlawful activity. That's right. So Sharon, what happens here, according to the rules, is that it's whatever the executive of the state certifies. So they default to the executive. So the legislature sets in motion the rules. The legislature nominates the electors, or the Secretary of State does, or how, it varies from state to state. But you have one set of electors. The governor of the state then certifies those votes. So that is the default set of votes. So if both houses disagree on which slate of electors to pick, it's the one that the governor officially certified. That takes the precedence. Thank you, Sharon. We have another one from Pinky, who says here, what good is redoing an election if the same crud goes on like ballot stuffing? No poll observers can see improper adjudications are done again. Yeah, that's a good point, right? And that's what many people have had a lot of frustrations about, especially with this run up onto Georgia. If it was stolen, what are we going to play the same game for, right? If somebody cheats you in a board game, do you ever play with that person again? No, never, right? You throw them out of your house and you say, you're a damn cheater. Don't do that. But this is all we've got, right? And we do have some recourse. I think a lot of poll watchers, a lot of eyeballs on the election in Georgia would be important. Same type of thing. If that were to happen in Wisconsin, let's say the Supreme Court here's the Wisconsin case. They say, you're right, this election was really, really messed up. We're going to throw it out. What the proposed resolution here in Wisconsin is, according to the Trump lawsuit, is to not redo the election. It's to just let the legislature appoint the electors. So just say, okay, we're not going to count the popular vote there. We're just going to have the legislature decide who wins. Another one from Wolfgang says, any plans for a New Year's stream? Would be interesting to see a kind of HQ. In Japan, they watch for the first sunrise and have apps and news for it. So, we are going to do a New Year's Day stream. I do not expect to be live streaming at the change of the year. So we're going to do a show on New Year's Eve. We're going to come back after I'm probably going to be in bed by 10 p.m. if we're being honest about this. All right. We'll see. It may be a wild night. Maybe I'll push it back to like 11. Maybe. I don't know. But it's not going to be a watch the ball drop on Watching the Watchers, unfortunately. So we will be back, though, on the following day. We're going to do a New Year's Day show. Don't know what that's going to be about yet because it's going to be the same format. I think I might have a little bit something interesting to share with you, but I got a lot of prep to do on that. We'll see if I can get it done. We have Sharon Quidney who says, my head is spinning with all this. It's a real brain buster. Glad you can straighten out some of it for us. Thanks, Sharon. I'm trying. It is a lot. You're right. It's a lot. And even some of the people who've been doing this for a lot longer than I have are still having questions about it. This is sort of where lawyers make their money. Lawyers are making arguments and sort of analyzing the different alternatives, how things can play out. And even, other constitutional lawyers and other individuals who study this stuff, they're all sort of going, I'm pretty sure this is how this works. Pretty sure this is how it's going to happen. But nothing has gone according to plan in this year. Maybe 2021 will change. This is going to be a 2021 thing. Hopefully it's different than what we're expecting. We have Bethany Lawson who says, good job. Thanks, Bethany. I appreciate that. Another one from David Smith that says, cool. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that from both of you. We have Teek who has 2 chats, one with a question. Says, do state electors threaten each other a lot? Texas AG versus Austin mayor, legal action if restrictions on restaurant operations aren't pulled back. So do state electors threaten each other a lot? So there's kind of 2 questions there, Teek. So do state electors or do state elected officials? So state electors, it's kind of a rare thing, right? You only have every 4 years, you have electors who are nominated for their party. So you've got Republican electors and Democrat electors. I haven't seen anything that those people are at each other's throats, but certainly elected politicians, they're always at each other's throats, right? That's part of the job. And you see that around the country. You've got here, she's saying the Texas AG versus the Austin mayor. That's just standard political theater. I don't know how much is personal rather than just political spectacle, sort of kabuki theater, as they call it. Everybody's out there trying to sort of slam dunk on the other person and increase their profile. So, I don't know if it's really genuine or not, but there are a lot of high emotions running around now, especially in light of the restaurant closures and those types of things. So it's a good question. Another one from Wolfgang says, if they don't let us have 1 more term of Trump, then we will make it 2 more terms. How high they want that wall to be. So Wolfgang's going to just keep building that wall. And then anybody who doesn't support Trump, you go on the other side of the wall. Bye-bye. Thanks, Wolfgang. K. Bean says, Mr. Robert, you're a superstar. Well, I feel that way about you too, K. Bean. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the nice message. We have Gert-Jan Decker, who says, love your show. Greetings from the Czech Republic. Trump will win. Very cool. The Czech Republic. I was literally talking about this. I'd like to go over there. I would really like to travel. I've been to Europe, but I haven't been over to that part of the world, and I'd like to check that out. So maybe we'll connect when I'm over there. We have Ryan, which is not going to be for a while, unfortunately. We have Ryan Renard, who says, I think our main roadblock will be that the Dems control the House come January 6th. We at least have our 1 senator that we didn't have yesterday. It's very optimistic, right? That's a very good point. Yesterday, we didn't have a senator. Now we've got 1. And I think if politicians are, as I suspect, I think there may be some additional senators that come through. Now that the dam has sort of been broken, there's a crack in the facade. We have 1 confirmed. It's kind of an all or nothing type of proposition. It's either you don't have any senators, and that protects you from having to make a difficult Senate floor vote. But if you have to make the vote anyways, and you don't want to be the guy who forced you to make the vote, and somebody else is leading the charge, you can just join in on it. So maybe Ted Cruz joins, maybe some other senators join between now and the 6th. It's 7 days. And there's a lot more information allegedly coming out. So we'll see. Miss Faith was sending me something. Okay, so this is from the Supreme Court docket. All right, so let's take a look. So this is that Bognet case that Liberty or Death had mentioned. I have not seen this case, so this is very interesting. So let's take a look here. U.S. Court of Appeals from the 3rd Circuit. Looks like this is over on the Supreme Court docket. Petition was filed November 20th. Distributed for conference. I don't believe I've seen this lawsuit. Let's take a look at the petition. Get rid of that. All right, so Pennsylvania General Assembly. So more Pennsylvania stuff. We've got Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Looks like Electors Clause, equal protection claims, parties to the statements. All right. So this is what a petition for a writ of certiorari looks like. You can see how long it is. This one is, let's see over there. It's not super long. A writ of certiorari, constitutional provisions, introduction. All right. So I've got that pulled open. I will take a look at that. We've got some waiver of rights. Nobody's responding. Waiver. This is interesting. Distributed for conference. Wow, okay. Very interesting, liberty or death. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm not real sure why I haven't seen that one. Very interesting. All right, we've got another one from Sharon who says, the court gets an F from me. They could have done the country a real favor by having a trial with discovery, testimony. They grounded the ball. Yeah, I totally agree with that. You know, it was disappointing. Look, even if it didn't go, like I'm not saying the Supreme Court should have just come out and said, yeah, Donald Trump wins the election. Here you go. Here's the presidency. Thanks for playing. I don't know that that's the right answer either. In fact, it's not the right answer, but we just wanted a little bit of clarity, right? Can courts just do whatever they want, even if it goes against the will of the legislature? Can different local election boards just change the rules on the fly for any reason that they want to make up, for COVID, for example? Supreme Court, in my mind, should have come out and said, absolutely not, right? Separation of power. The legislature is granted plenary of power by the Constitution to govern elections. They set the rules. If the court changes it, that's a violation of separation of powers. It's unlawful. Can't do that. Supreme Court has just sort of, sitting on their hands, and I will fully expect there to be more problems like this in the future. Because why shouldn't there be? Why doesn't every state who controls the Board of Elections, whatever party controls the Board of Elections, why not every year they just change the rules at the last minute on the fly to support their candidate? There's no repercussions for doing that. Supreme Court won't get involved. Good point, Sharon. We have LD 2020 says, I know you just said that you have a Georgia receipts and slides prior to the election. Would you be willing to send those to a tech-savvy objector? So LD 2020, yeah, I mean, we post the slides every day on our Discord server, so go grab them. Yeah, I mean, and if you're looking for something specific, if you watch back on previous shows and you find something that you want, and you can't find the Discord, you can't find the slides in the Discord, hop on Discord, message Miss Faith. Happy to send them to you. We've got screenshots of stuff all over the place, like literally thousands of slides. Every time we do a broadcast, we save the slides. So they're available if you want them. Just tell me what show, what day, and we'll give them to you. We have Wolfgang Deo, plaintiff majority forward. How about defendant minority right? Oh, we got a little pun on the names going on now from Wolfgang. I remember seeing a shipyard worker named Supreme Truth Allah on BAE Shipyards. Yeah, I was thinking about maybe renaming myself something a little bit more, incredible than Robert, like Robert the Great, maybe something like that. The powerful. The all-knowing and wise, right? Just call yourself whatever you want. It doesn't even matter anymore. We've got Gertjan Decker, who says, you said Democrats will do the same in 2024. The Republicans have a lot of evidence to make their case. I cannot imagine Democrats will find anything similar. Or is this not about what you can prove? Yeah, so I think the issue here is that, if the Democrats are getting away with fraudulently modifying the elections, or just changing the rules in a way that gives them favor, let's say. Maybe it's not even fraud. Maybe what they're doing is just legal, right? It's just changing the rules. The courts have said it's legal now. In my mind, it should have been illegal, but the courts have not found that it's illegal. Courts have said, yeah, courts can just do whatever they want. Election boards can do whatever they want. So now that Republicans know those are the rules, I think that they're going to use those rules. And, if the Democrats have a major advantage in mail-in voting or absentee voting, and next election cycle, the Republicans control the Secretary of State or the Commission on Elections, then they can just go and just say, yeah, even though the state grants some mail-in balloting, wow, we think it's fraudulent. We're just going to change those rules. And what are the courts going to do about it? The Democrats will sue the Republicans. The Republicans will point right back to the Democrats' lawsuits and say, well, you guys did it. Why can't we do it? And so now we're just going to have, this is just, it's going to be a snowball effect for the foreseeable future. I think the Supreme Court should have stepped in, settled this once and for all, said this is what's allowed, this is what's not allowed, figure it out. But they didn't. So now there's a ton of gray area, and it's going to be exploited by both parties. Now, I don't know that the Republicans are going to engage in, fraud or anything, but if there's no harm, if there's no repercussion, if you can just deliver, truckloads of ballots at 4 a.m. the day after the election and just spike the votes, and you don't get in trouble for that, why wouldn't you do that? We've got, because integrity, honesty, we're talking about politics, folks. There is none of that in there. We've got Luing Wing, who says, good job. Thanks, Luing. We've got, I appreciate that. I haven't seen that fox before. I like him, though. Looks like a little samurai. Looks like he's in a video game. We have the GA. This one comes from Aaron J1124. The GA Senate runoff is on January 5th, but during the November 3rd election, GA didn't have the final results until like 5 days later. What happens if they don't have the results in time for the joint session of Congress on the 6th? Who will represent the state of Georgia in the Senate? That is a good question. So this is for the next term. So I think it's whoever is currently seated is going to be involved in that one. And that was Tuberville. No, Tuberville's not in Georgia. Tuberville's out of Alabama. So I think it's the current senators. That's a good question. My dates are all mixed up right now. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head because it's a special. I don't know what the answer is on that. Yeah, it's a good question. Very good question, Aaron. Don't know. Have to look it up. So if you wanted to just sort of game that out, you would say that if the election's on the 5th, Congress takes the new Congress takes office on the 3rd. I'm getting my dates mixed up on this. I got to revisit that. I can't do this. I can't do numbers on the fly. Huge mistake. Anytime I try to do numbers on this program, it's pretty catastrophic. So I'm just going to go ahead and avoid that right now. I know it's not math, but it's numbers. And I don't see those very well. We have Aaron Seavey who says, Rob, big fan of the show. I think. Keep up the great work. Do not change a thing. Your team kicks ass. Miss Faith and Ma, the best. Question, does the R&R Law Group handle federal cases or just Arizona cases? We do handle federal cases. It's not something that I have a ton of myself personally a familiarity with. Most of my stuff is sort of, I call it boots on the ground. Like every day, you go out to a bar, you get into a fight with somebody, you're charged with a crime. It's the raw, down and dirty criminal charges. Federal court, you do see some of those, but largely those are more, sort of white collar crimes, international incidents where, somebody's not a citizen of this country. You see, they're higher profile cases. I've handled a few of them. We like to cut our teeth in state court. We do handle federal cases. We actually work with a very good lawyer who helps us on some of those things. But yeah, most of our cases are dealt with in state court. So state superior court and local city municipalities and that type of stuff. Thanks Aaron though for the nice compliment. Appreciate it. You're right. Miss Faith is incredible. Ma is incredible. We have an awesome team here. We're having a lot of fun. So we're not planning on changing much other than I may start going on some other shows, sort of not change the format of this one because this works, but maybe I may go start doing some additional shows or, kind of speaking out a little bit more about it because I tell a lot of people here, what can we do about this? Right. And speak out. And if I'm limiting myself and not sort of going out there and spreading the message, then I'm sort of not taking my own medicine, which is not good. We have another one from Lava Java Lava who says the Brady list is nothing compared to mugshots on Google searches. Are there copyright laws that go against this? So I'm not sure what type of copyright laws you'd be talking about, but yeah, mugshots are a huge problem. And I actually have a 30 or 45 minute long video about how to remove them and how that works. So what was happening for a very long time is that many states would publish mugshots. In Arizona, if you get arrested for a crime, your mugshot goes on the internet. You can just type in Arizona mugshots. You'll go to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office website. They'll have a list of mugshots. It's like a public shaming thing. It's very gross behavior. I think it's very inappropriate. Those people, they're arrested. They're innocent until proven guilty, but they put their picture on the internet even though they haven't been found guilty of anything yet. Right? So there are people who make that list who are later found innocent, but their mugshot is already on the internet. Once that happens, there are a lot of private companies, some really disgusting people out there who hide behind all sorts of pseudonames, and they have like different shell companies, and they change their websites from arrestrecords.org to arrestrecords.biz to arrest or whatever. They're just copying and pasting their websites, and what they do is they build these bots that then go and scrape people's mugshots off of the official government source website. So they'll go onto the Maricopa County Sheriff's website, scrape every single image and name off of that, put it on their private website. Then on that private website, they were charging people to remove it. So they would say, okay, we'll remove this mugshot because they were ranking in Google. You type your name in, Robert Gruler, boom, mugshot. Oh, crap. I got to go and apply for this job. I want to get that off. How do I get rid of that? You go to their website. They'll charge you $350 to remove it. You pay that fee, but you don't know that they have 100 different websites. All they're doing is copying and pasting their same website, their same bots, and they're spamming your profile on a number of different websites. So you pay to remove it from one. They just take it. They go, okay, we got a sucker here. They post it on another one, which then ranks, and you got to pay it again and again and again and again. And so people are getting fleeced out of their money by these really shady operators. And a lot of states have passed laws now to rectify that. And so they say if you are, sort of holding people's information hostage, that is unlawful. So now what a lot of these website operators do, they're just operating them for spite now. They will just hold them on there. They're saying they're doing journalism or a public service or something. They'll hold them on there just for spite, as far as I can tell. Right? They may run some ads on their website and get a little bit of revenue from AdSense from just the foot traffic. But it's pretty gross. Pretty gross behavior. You know whose mugshots often don't make the internet most of the time? Cops. Of course not. We have AL who says, I like body cams required for officers on patrol and film released to the public, but you can't because people riot over a guy shot while chasing cops with a knife. Yeah, that's true. I think you're talking about, were you referencing Jacob Blake on that one there, AL? It's an interesting point. I do think that all cops should have body cameras. If we got to pay for them, we got to pay for them. Put them on. Make sure they cannot turn them off. We had a lot of situations in Arizona, and particularly out of Scottsdale, the Scottsdale PD. They would, this was a couple of years ago, but what they would do is turn their body cameras on and off. Click it on. Oh, it's on. Click it off. And we would ask for body camera footage, and we'd get like 12 different videos of the incident. And we'd say, well, that's weird, because it should just be one video. Why are there 12? Because they turn them on and off. On and off. Oh, it's a malfunction. Oh, I bumped it. Oh, my battery ran out. Whatever BS they want to make up. So I would say they're mandatory. If you don't have it on, the default presumption is what you did was unlawful or unethical. You have a right to keep your body, you put it on. If something happens and it's questionable and there's two interpretations of the event, the defendant, the person who's charged with the crime, and the cop had a body camera that wasn't on, his version loses because he had a way to prove himself right, didn't utilize it, turned it off, didn't charge it, whatever it is. He automatically loses. We default to the defendant, I think would be the appropriate way to address those issues. We have Captain Jim who says JFK's own brother was the U.S. Attorney General, and that totally flew. No questions of independence there. Sky is the limit for the Dems from there. Yeah, that's a good point, right? JFK, Robert Kennedy, Attorney General, keeping it all in the family. Another one from World War Wit. World War Wit's back with Quo Warranto. He's going to Title 11 of Arizona law. It says an action may be brought against any person who usurps, intrudes into law, or unlawfully holds or exercises any state public office or any franchise within this state. So that's interesting. Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that statute. I don't spend much time in Title 11 in Arizona law. Spend a lot of time on Title 28, which is our traffic code, and Title 13, which is our criminal code. So Title 11, I'll take a look at that one. Quo Warranto. Thank you, World War. Learning a lot today. I appreciate it. I learn a ton from these comments, and I get emails and stuff, and I read them, and I'm like, this is great stuff. So I really appreciate it. Thanks, World War. I'm not sure what to do with that other than I think the idea here, according to World War, with this Quo Warranto stuff is that if, an elector is purporting to be the authorized, certified elector, maybe you can use this Quo Warranto concept to bring an action against that person to remove them from office. Yesterday, we were talking about this concept. I had not heard about it, quite frankly. I had not seen it in law. And my point yesterday, which was just proven wrong by World War, was that sounded like a common law issue that hadn't been codified into statutes. And he just kind of just shoved this super chat right down my throat. He said, oh, it's common law? It's not codified into statute? How about this, Mr. Robert? How about you look at Title 11, Chapter 11, Article 3 of the Arizona Revised Statutes? What do you think about that, buddy boy? So I will look at that. Thanks, World War. We have another one coming in from Jennifer, who says, I hope you will be able to review the testimony of Pulitzer at the Georgia hearing today. Ballots from Democrats and Republicans were coded different and were even off center equals errors. I will. I am going to look at that one. I have it. It's already queued up. You know, what's so cool about Twitter is you can just bookmark stuff. I've basically bookmark a lot of things, and then I use that for my show prep. The first thing in there, I can tell you, is the Georgia hearing. So I will be looking at that tonight. Let's see here. Cheryl says, I wish I could give more. You're great. Thanks, Cheryl. I appreciate it. Listen, that's very generous of you. You don't have to give anything. I appreciate it. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful that you're enjoying some of the content. I want to make sure that you're back. Thanks for the message. Thanks for the support. It does matter. It goes a long way, and I am very appreciative of it. We have C. John, who says, should government give money to unemployed while people working that don't even bring home $300 a week, or could it be given to workers as an incentive? Should the government give money to unemployed while people working that don't even bring home $300 a week, or could it be given to workers as an incentive? Okay, so I see what you're saying. So I think the question here is, yes, there's a couple different buckets of people, right? There's a bucket of individuals who are not working. They're on lockdown. They're petrified of COVID. They're physically unable to work because of an illness or whatever that looks like as a result of COVID. It's COVID relief because a large group of people who are hurting. John's saying, well, should they get the money, or what about these other people who are still working, but they don't even bring home $300 a week, right? They're extremely, poverty stricken regardless of COVID, or they are working in spite of COVID. They're on lockdowns, they're working hard, but they're sort of not making ends meet. They're only getting $300. So he's asking, what's the distinguishing factor here? Are they just going to give it to unemployed people? Are they going to give it to anybody who's making a certain amount of money? And I think that latter is true, actually. I think that what I had read was it's basically anybody who makes less than $75,000 a year. So I think if that is how this money is going to be distributed, that $600 or whatever is coming down the pike, I think that's going to go to people who are under the $75,000 a year. And per your question, C. John, it would go to both buckets of people. It would go to the people who are working but not making enough, and it would also go to the people who are just not working, both as long as they've been impacted by COVID. We have Kez, who says it is not copy and paste journalism. It's weaponized anthropology. And, I think there's some truth to that. There's a guy who is as brilliant as they come. His name is Naval. He is pretty brilliant. He wrote a book. He actually didn't write a book. So most of his stuff is on Twitter. I would really encourage you to follow him if you're interested in any of that stuff. It's at Naval, Naval. And he just kind of espouses brilliance in a lot of different ways. And somebody accumulated a lot of his work, and they posted a book for free. It's called the Navalmanac, like an almanac for Naval, because he just sort of posted interesting blogs and interesting tweets and all that stuff, and somebody consolidated it into a free book. So you can go Google that right now. It's free, the Navalmanac. But he posted on Twitter today. He called it the narrative industrial complex is what exists. So we've talked about this before, sort of the media industrial complex. We've talked about the military industrial complex, the pharmacological industrial complex, the medical industrial complex, and that is referencing this idea that the government is in bed with some of these industries. And what Naval was talking about, I think, is sort of what you're alluding to, Kez, this idea that the narrative is being driven by the people in power. It's not about really talking about news anymore. It's not about, doing investigative journalism like Dave Biscobing was doing. It's more about crafting a narrative. It's about setting a tone. And this was one of my criticisms before the election. If you were going to rig an election, you'd want to make sure that you had a narrative in place for before, during, and after the election, just like you would do with a marketing campaign, just like you would do with a trial, right? You've got an opening argument. You've got your case that you present. You've got a closing argument. Same situation here. And what the media was doing, I thought, was really framing out that Joe Biden was up by 20 points. He was going to win. He was going to win. He was going to win. Even when they were talking about Trump winning on election night, there was this whole narrative that went out about calling it a red wave. No, I think it was they were calling it the blue wave, the red mirage. That was the framing, right? It was marketing framing. They were just trying to tell you that Don't be persuaded by the red mirage. This was coming from the Democrats and a lot of people in the media saying that on election night, Trump's going to look like he's winning, but it's a red mirage. There's going to be a blue wave that comes after the fact. That's really where we're going to win. So they were pre-framing the election outcome before the election took place, just to tell you, listen, there's going to be a lot more votes coming in. Don't believe what you see on November 3rd. Wait until after the fact. And then after the election, a whole slew, a whole different narrative came into fruition. And we're still sort of living through a lot of that. So I would tend to agree with you, Kez. I don't think that it is as lazy as just copy-paste journalism. I don't think that it's a bunch of overpaid board journalists out there who just don't want to write articles. I think there is a strategy to this, right? There are, editorial boards, and they talk about these things, and they're all, they're all being funded by different foreign entities. They've all got different interests. There are certain stories that they just don't talk about, period. Why is that, right? Wouldn't a real journalist have at least mentioned something about Hunter Biden prior to the election? It's the vice president's son who's running to be the president. And there was just a whitewash of the story across the board. Well, why is that? If it was just copy and paste journalism, you would presume that some lazy journalist would just copy and paste an article about it, but nobody did because there was a kibosh on that story. You do not talk about that stuff because, as you said, the media is weaponized. This is where I think Donald Trump ultimately lost. How can you compete with somebody calling you a racist on every single news channel for 4 years? How do you compete with that? Even if you're not a racist, right? If you heard that every day for 4 years and your friends started believing it and your parents started believing it and your wife started believing it, you're probably going to believe it because you've heard it enough that it's just going to suddenly become true. So there's a purpose behind the media. And that's why it's called programming, right? It's programming people's minds. And it's pretty effective, as we are seeing. Test 1 says the buses were always running to get people to Walmart. They could have voted on time. The buses were always running to get people to Walmart. They could have voted on time. That comes from Test 1. Walmart's in the thick of it right now. Their social media director is probably having a bad day. We have Jenny Wren who says, happening now live on NTD, citizen investigation uncovers thousands of illegal votes in Arizona. So I've got I got some more watching to do over there. Thanks, Jenny. I appreciate that. NTD, I think they're sort of a companion to the Epic Times. I like their work. We have Teresa Child who says, if you haven't watched Rob on Civil Law, do it. He was great. Talked about his book, Eric's House, Rittenhouse, Election, Lockdowns. Bonus, Wolfgang Deo appears in the Superchats. That's true. Wolfgang was over there. It's so funny. Wolfgang, man, I appreciate it. It's so fun to have you poke around. Speaking of who's next, guess who's next? Thanks, Teresa. It was fun. I had a good time talking to him in civil law. I think I may do more of those. Like I said, I'm sort of getting my training wheels on with this YouTube stuff a little bit, but I do have a lot to say and I got a lot to talk about. So we'll see what 2021 holds in that regard, but definitely go check out Uncivil Law. It was a good conversation. Very nice guy. And I think he's got some good, insightful points to make on his channel. So if you're interested in legal news, be sure to check him out as well. We've got another one from Wolfgang Deo. Dem says, oh, we're not trying to take away your guns, conspiracy theorist. As such, I'm going to start proposing legislation to do that. Yeah. That's always like on the forefront of their minds. I don't know, however, how we talked about this on Uncivil Law's channel. I don't know that they have the momentum to do that right now. Remember, this was part of Beto's entire platform. It was after a shooting happened somewhere. I forget which one it was. And he was going to take away everybody's guns. That's what he was running on during the Democratic primaries in 2016. Didn't work out so well for him. And now, in light of the riots, in light of COVID, in light of Biden presidency, there aren't any guns. If you own a firearm, have you been to your local gun store? They're all gone. I was asking about certain things the last time I was in there, and they're like, don't expect it until middle of next year. Shelves were empty. There are no bullets anywhere. You can't find ammunition anywhere. So if they do try to take away people's guns, I'm going to guess that a lot of people have boating accidents and they lost their guns in those. Wouldn't that be a shame? Dancing Elephant says, why is it so difficult to get a senator to commit to debate on the electoral vote? Well, it's because senators are big weenies, really. I mean, they don't like to make those types of decisions. They think about it just in terms of a senator, right? If you want to have a long career in the Senate, you don't do much. Okay, think about the people who've been there forever. Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, John McCain, all of these people who've just been lifelong senators. What do? They go in there and they just sort of kick the can around a little bit. Every now and then they poke their heads up on issues that they think is going to support their reelection. But that's it, right? If you take a very aggressive stance on something, you don't stick around for too long. It's the path of least resistance. If you get somebody who's a firebrand out there, they may lose the next go round, and nobody wants to lose a Senate seat. We have Sammy Elliott, who says Trump needs to hire you ASAP. He can win with you. I think I'd be open to that type of invitation. It'd be kind of a fun experience just to go hang out and see how things are working in the Trump White House. We have Ellie Perry, who says, are there any plausible legal strategies of victory left for Trump to be able to overturn the election results? Yeah, and Ellie, I think there is. It's sort of a long shot at this point in time, but we're talking about it right now. It's going to be what happens next on January 6th. It's going to be the counting of the electoral votes. If in a quick summation of it, if there is an objection or series of objections to the counting of the votes, and those votes are ultimately agreed upon to be thrown out, then the total number of electoral votes that Joe Biden has drops underneath the threshold of 270, which is the constitutional requirement. You need that in order to get elected. If he's under 270, then what you have is what's called a contingent election. That means that the House of Representatives votes for the next president. One state, one vote. Republicans have more states. Trump has a second term. That is probably the only plausible legal strategy here, unless something major happens. If Georgia flips, if the legislature in Pennsylvania decides we're going to take the power back and go and nominate our own electors, or something like that happens, something that's not foreseeable right now, there are other potential legal strategies, but the one I just described is probably the most likely and most realistic. We have Ellie Perry, who says, okay, my other question can be, is it possible that Mike Pence could overturn the Electoral College's votes when they all meet in January? So Ellie, another very good question. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Representative Louis Gohmert is suing Mike Pence in order to basically get him the power to do that. Right now, the allegation here is that Mike Pence doesn't have much authority at all when he's counting the electoral votes. It's more ceremonious, right? It's ceremonial. He's just kind of opening them, handing them to the tellers. The tellers will count them and send them back to him, and then he announces who the next president is. But the argument in Rep. Louis Gohmert's case was that, well, what if he gets two slates of electors? What if he gets Arizona's official votes and he gets Arizona's unofficial votes, right? The GOP cast their own set of them, sending them in because they needed to do that to put a stake in the ground in case some of the election litigation reversed something. Then they could point back and say, look, we told you this whole time we were the rightful votes. We had the correct certificates of ascertainment. As you can see in that lawsuit, we're going to point back to ours, not theirs, based on the fact that we won. So if Mike Pence now, the argument goes, if he's looking at two slates of electors, does he have the power to say, well, these look better to me. This Arizona set that is uncertified from the GOP, those look legitimate because the other votes are unlawful. They're questionable. Does he have the power to do that? According to Rep. Louis Gohmert, he does. Okay, and we went through an analysis on that yesterday, and I thought that I don't think it's a good argument, quite frankly. I don't think it makes any sense logically or rationally to give Mike Pence or the next president of the Senate. Remember, this was Joe Biden in 2016. He was the president of the Senate. He was the vice president. We don't want that person to have unilateral control to just decide who the president is, right? Because in this case, yeah, maybe Mike Pence would say, well, Pennsylvania was fraudulent. They did all this stuff. But the next time around, maybe they just, if it's a Democrat vice president, it's Kamala Harris who's looking at this and just going, no, that's a GOP vote. Gone. GOP, gone. That's weird. Whoever won is a Democrat. They won by all of the votes. It just doesn't make sense. So I don't think that is a realistic, plausible possibility in this case. We have some others. Wolfgang's back. He says, by the way, the question, who is the president, is just a question of the facts of reality. I don't care if they like the president or not. I am a libertarian. So I understand your point. I probably kind of spun off on a wrong direction on that question, but I understand what you're saying. Sort of a fact question, right? Who's the president? Do you know, are you invested in politics at all? Like, do you even know what country we're in? Sort of like a man on the street. Wolfgang Deo's going on doing a Jimmy Kimmel man on the street interview process. Would be interesting. We've got Joseph Coles, who says Dems secretly changed the amounts to qualify for the stimulus from $75K to $150K for singles and $300K for couples. This is why McConnell blocked it. Yeah, that's a lot, right? That's a lot of money. If somebody's making that kind of money, you would hope that they have some savings, that they're a little bit smart with their money, that they're not overextended, and they can weather the storm a little bit more than somebody who's making 50 grand, right? Who's living literally paycheck to paycheck. So I would disagree with that increase as well. I think McConnell's right on that one. We have S Love who says, this one is just for all you guys. Thanks for all you do. Keep up the hard work and the great info. We love you guys. Super grateful. Thanks, S Love. I really appreciate that. It's nice. And S Love, you're always here. You're always chiming in. So I really appreciate the support. It's consistent and appreciative, and you have great comments. So thank you right back. I can say that for all of us, for Faith, for Ma, for everybody here. Thank you. Jenny Wren says, lilac is your color. Lilac. Is this lilac? Is that what this color is? Or is it my lip balm? I'll take the compliment. Thanks, Jenny. Lilac. I'll have to look up what that is. I'm not fashionable, so I'll take your word for it. We have Sammy Elliott who says, if election F, fraud, has been 100% been confirmed in Georgia, could this mean the Secretary of Georgia go to jail for the handling of Fulton County? Probably not, honestly. So remember this, government officials, they have what's called qualified immunity. And this goes to cops. This goes to, basically anybody in the government. If they're doing something that is sort of within the confines of their official duties and they make a mistake in it and they can justify the mistake and it wasn't something that rises to the level of gross negligence, regular negligence is even protected. So what you'll see happen is a cop does something wrong. It was against policy, but it was just regular negligence, right? He just shouldn't have done it. It wasn't like he did something egregious, something unconscionable, something that is totally outside the realms of anything that's possible. That would be gross negligence, and they wouldn't be protected from that. So in this case, if you could prove that Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State over in Georgia, if you could prove that he was willfully involved in some sort of criminality to defraud the election, then that would be something that he could get arrested for, charged, indicted on, at least investigated for. But if it was something where he was sort of wrong around the edges and he was doing his best and he can make a good case for that, then no, right? He's going to be protected. The government really likes to protect its own kind. They don't care so much about you, but if you're a cop, you can beat the hell out of somebody else. But if they're mad about it, we're going to make sure that you're protected. Go watch Dave Biscobing. Go watch his story. He's got some pretty good examples of that. Some cop beat the hell out of somebody and is free, lied about a bunch of stuff, free, collecting a pension. Not a big deal. Because the government doesn't want you coming after the government. AL says, people still think Trump called white supremacists, very fine people. He literally condemned them. Watch the full speech. The mainstream media lies all the time. Yeah, this was something that was very frustrating. People were saying that Donald Trump in a speech this was surrounding a debate around Charlottesville. And there was two sides to it, right? There were white supremacists that came out. There were white people who were not white supremacists. There were people of color on the other side of the aisle, a lot of debate going on. And Trump came out, was trying to sort of cool the environment and said, look, we're talking about statutes. We're talking about a shooting. I forget what the underlying altercation was about, but there are very fine people on both sides of the aisle. They're out there having a civic discourse. And in the next sentence or a couple sentences down, he says, listen, but not the white supremacists, not the KKK. They should be totally condemned. I condemn them totally. I think that's verbatim. I condemn them totally. Right. So he was specifically excluding white supremacists as calling them fine people. But Joe Biden, this was the centerpiece of his campaign. He said it on the debate stage, and Donald Trump didn't slam dunk that right down his throat, which he should have, because it's an outright lie. You can go read the transcript. That's not what he said. He was not calling white supremacists very fine people. But I've seen that repeated ad nauseum all over the place. All you got to do is read the transcript, and you can debunk that yourself in about 2 seconds. But the media, they wouldn't go through that, I guess, that trouble to find out what he actually said. And Joe Biden was literally on the debate stage repeating this lie over and over and over again. Very frustrating. We have Wolfgang Deo who says, aho, Check friends. Rob, be careful of parks when in Europe. I was actually Rob last year in one. Actually, have a selfie with the guy. Okay, good. I'm glad it ended well for you. Hopefully you guys got an espresso after that. Bradley Durfee says, spec on your name. Need help. DUI man. Min 6 months. Spec on your name. Need help. Well, listen, I don't know what you mean by that, Bradley, but if you have been charged with a DUI, give our office a call. We offer free case evaluations. We're open. Come on in. Following proper COVID restrictions, masking up, all that stuff. If you need help with that, genuinely, seriously, give us a call. We've got an awesome team of people here. We'll help you get you scheduled, get you right in, and see what we can do to help. We have another one coming from SA. That is a heck of a name. Something Solace One says, correct me if I'm wrong, but Biden had to concede his presidential run, I think in the 87-88 race, after he was caught committing plagiarism. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think he's actually run into that plagiarism issue a number of times. You can go find some interesting YouTube clips on that where people are saying, anybody who plagiarizes other stuff and doubles down on it can never be qualified to be president. That person is dishonest. Here we are. We have another one who says, I'm from S Love says, I totally disagree with that other commenter. Sit right where you are. So I must have missed something somewhere. Sit right here. Some people have told me that I should back up further because I'm too close to the camera. My face is too in your face. I'm pretty comfortable right here, quite frankly. And the other reason I'm this close to the camera is because I think most consumption, or at least a lot of consumption, is done on mobile, and it's small. So you want to see the person's face, right? I don't like watching people when their face is all the way back here. Hey guys, welcome to Watching the Watchers. Right? It just doesn't feel as right. So if we're talking about where I'm seated, I think this works. We have New York Governor Cuomo announces 6,700 Bills fan can attend the playoff game, and he'll be there. But if you're Jewish and you're Orthodox, you're out of luck, my friends. We have Raka Zool, who says the Georgia hearing resulted in unanimous decision to obtain ballots for Pulitzer to check. I see similar blocks like we see in Arizona to occur, though. Thoughts? So I'm going to have to watch that hearing. I can't really comment on that with too much detail. But in Arizona, the way that it worked is they started with a small audit, right? They did an audit of 100 votes. They found a 3% swing in favor of Donald Trump. Then the judge authorized a more extensive audit, I think of 1,200 ballots, or maybe it was a bigger number. They did an audit of those ballots, and then they found out that the margin was not as significant as in the smaller batch, and then that sort of ended the inquiry there. But there's a lot of other problems with what happened in Arizona, because originally the way that it was set up is they had these little individual drop centers in different precincts. Then they created really massive sort of conglomerates of drop centers. And so the issue here was, when you're doing an audit, do you do an audit of all of the buckets as they're combined? So let's say in individual precincts, we have precinct A, B, C, D, E, whatever, right? The audit, in my mind, should have been of each one of those individual buckets. Okay, well, let's check precinct A. Let's check B. Let's check C. Let's do individual audits of each one of those. The problem here, the rules were changed very recently by our election person. They just took all of those buckets and they put them into a big bucket. And they said, okay, we're going to audit that big bucket. We only need to pull from that one. Well, the problem there is, of course, you can't identify where there are problems because they're all mixed in together. They're all commingled with each other. So if that is, what happens in Georgia, you may run into the same issues, right? How can you identify where the fraud was or where the problems were if it's all just one big bucket? You can't. By design. We have the Kang, who says there was no red wave in the House compared to 2016. When Trump won 4 years ago, the Republicans won 241 seats versus 211 Republican seats in 2020. So the Kang, my only point there, it was the Republicans won seats in the House this last election. Am I wrong on that? I'm pretty sure they won more than expected, right? It was supposed to be this massive blue wave. The Democrats were supposed to win the Senate handily. They were supposed to win the House handily and the presidency. And they retained control of the House, but their margin shrunk this election against all of the prognostications. So when I say the red wave, that's all I mean. We have Wolfgang Deo, who says, I like qualified immunity in a situation where body cams are messed with. It provides a warning to a misconduct popo, and then after that, investigation. So qualified immunity for cops messing with their body cameras. So it's a warning, and then after that, you get an investigation. And the last one of the day, folks, is just this very nice, simple thumbs up from our friend Chris Wolney over here with our gym going, thumbs up, friendly pair. Thanks, Chris. Very much appreciated. And I want to thank all of you for those very nice super chats, those very nice questions. They mean a lot. A lot of nice compliments today, and thank you very much for those. We're going to wrap it up right here, folks. I want to thank you once again for being a part of this show, being a part of the program. If you have not already done so, we would love a subscribe. It really keeps us kind of motivated. I love watching those numbers. It's just fun. We're almost at that threshold number. So if we could get there, I'd be very much appreciative of that. And if you could do us another solid, share it. Give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, send it to a friend. We like to have these conversations every day. We want you to invite people to come join us as we dissect some of these issues. Another reminder, the slides are going to be in the Discord chat, which is in the description where you're watching this. You can also get a copy of my book. It's called Beginning to Winning, How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System. That is me. It's really for people who've been charged with a crime, but as somebody mentioned today, there's an introductory section about me and sort of a little bit more about my story. I talked about some of it on Uncivil Laws channel earlier this week, but you can grab a copy on Amazon if you want. If you want to pay for it, you can get it there. I'd love a review if you found it helpful or at least moderately interesting. If you want a free copy, it's available. Get the PDF right in our Discord server. Go check it out and enjoy. I would also like to invite you to think about sending somebody who's been charged with a crime to our law firm. That's what we do, right? We're criminal lawyers. That's our day job. Every day, boots on the ground. We have an awesome team of people. We love to help good people who've been charged with crimes kind of navigate the system and get things back on track. I'm not of the opinion that somebody should go into the justice system and come out worse. We as a society want people to do better. If we put people in the justice system and they come out worse, that's worse for society. Okay, we have to help fix that person afterwards. So how do we help people get things back on track in a way that doesn't ruin their lives? We're very good at it. We're very passionate about it. And so we'd be humbled and honored if you unfortunately happen to know somebody in that position. We can help them. We offer free case evaluations. We have a great team here. We're open, ready, and available to help. And we'd be humbled if you trusted us enough to send your referral our way. Other than that, my friends, I want to thank you once again for being a part of the program. One more reminder to subscribe if you have not already done so. We will be back here tomorrow, same time, same place. It's going to be 5 p.m. Arizona time. That means it's 4 p.m. on the West Coast, 6 p.m. Central time, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. We want to make sure you're here. We're going to grind through all of the rest of the week, close out 2020 strong, and launch into 2021. And we want to make sure that you are with us and a part of the conversation. I want to wish everybody a very lovely night's rest. I will see you back here tomorrow. Until then, bye-bye.